Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this special meeting of Council to order. Our clerk today will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. We have a number of late items, Ms. Gurry.
Yes, thank you, Worship. For late items today, agenda item 4A, Serauxmen Stadium. We're adding a PowerPoint presentation, some pictures from Mr. Harding. Agenda item 8B1, COVID recovery plan. We're adding the COVID-19 recovery plan planning framework presentation. And agenda item 8B3, we're adding the report reopening plan for arenas. And that's it, Your Worship.
Thank you. I'd obviously like to first recognize that you are gathered on the traditional territory of the Tsayumak First Nation. Today's special council meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M192. Therefore, members of the public are required to observe meetings virtually and not attend in person. Question period will be suspended throughout the duration of this order being in effect. Physical distancing will be maintained at all times. Members of staff that are partaking in the meetings will be spread out in the auditorium. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items, as indicated already, and I'd ask for a motion of the approval of the agenda as amended. Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Martman. All those in favor, motion carries. Thank you very much. And the first presentation is a very happy and good news presentation, and delighted to see Mr. Harding here this morning.
Yes, Your Worship, it's another Monday and another virtual opening, which we're happy to do. So again, we would like to be on site with the baseball community and with council and the community to add another great amenity to the community, but with the COVID situation, we need to do things a little differently. So starting tonight, these lights will be on for local teams to use and enjoy. This is a lighting program, something that's been planned or hoped for and a goal for the baseball community for many, many years. And we've had a plan for initially on Mariner Field, but the goal always was to have it at Serauxmen Field, but of course we didn't own it at the time. But 2015, we initially had got plans in place to put it on Mariner Field, and then when negotiations with the school board moved along that the city could acquire the stadium, and once we got the stadium, then we moved that project and the goal of having a lit baseball field in the city to Serauxmen. And so very pleased council and the mayor are supporting this project, and we now have a complete 90-foot field lit LED system. So I'll go through a few pictures, and then maybe there'll be some questions or some other comments I'll add to the presentation. But some different shots of the field in action last week. And again, if you see with this lit field and then the NDSS field beside it, Rotary Bowl beside it, of course, the Aquatic Center, NDSS, that whole sports zone really pops and comes to life. It is a little, to have a lit baseball field is more complicated than any other kind of field because we have to have 8 different light poles, including a lot more lights on each of those poles, plus uplighting, because to light a baseball field to a certain standard for safe play does require a lot more. We'll leave it with that one. So again, Your Worship, another virtual opening for us and council, and I can provide some more details on the actual lights and how it's going to serve and the number of teams it's going to serve in the community, but another great amenity to add to the community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harding. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. It's great to see this. In terms of setting Nanaimo up as a host city in the future for having baseball tournaments, do we need more than this? Do you have any information on that?
With the Serauxmen fields across the way, with the other 90-foot diamond, and then the other 70s and 80-foot, I don't think so, but this definitely provides that more hours of operation for if a tournament was in a community, we could modify the length of the diamonds here if we had to. So it just gives you that much more. But to do this, say there's a tournament going on throughout the day, and then the playoffs are at nighttime or something like that, it gives you those extra hours. What it also does, what lit fields, also what it helps is it helps with the shoulders. It extends the shoulder season, gets them starting early in the season, they can go later in the season, and then of course more can play. I will mention on the 27th we'll be coming to council with a phased overall improvement plan for the stadium, and one of the options in there is to actually put in artificial infield and possibly artificial outfield, which then makes it a facility that can theoretically be used all year round, similar to our other all-weather fields. So those are some other options coming forward. So the lights with an artificial would, and again, increase the hours of use exponentially for the groups and organizations.
Thanks.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Harding. I have a couple of questions. Number one is the cost of the power to run these lights. Is it going to be reflected in the rental fee for users of the facility?
Yes,
That's
it
the first
will.
one.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Answer that one if you like.
It
first.
will. Now, one of the nice things on here is that this is our only lit LED fields too. So, because LED lights, our cost per hour is substantially less. I don't have that actual number with me here, but I can get that to council.
Sorry.
But with the LED, we went up and got the LED because the technology is so much more available now with the LED. It is a little bit more expensive, but again, our hourly operations quite substantially less with the LED lighting.
Great, thanks. And the second question, if I may, is whose responsibility is it to turn the lights off after usage? Because I know that was an issue or has been an ongoing issue in lacrosse boxes. Is there some plan involved? I'm assuming there is. But.
It is. So this will be tied into, it will be eventually tied into our Sentinel system, which is all our lit fields are on. So the lights come on a certain time, they go off at a certain time. So those are set in. Some of the old lacrosse boxes weren't there years ago, but they are now. And then right now we're actually exploring with this system, with the company comes a program we want to try for a little bit, separate than our overall Sentinel light system and irrigation system that's computer controlled. And we're going to see how this works for a bit. So it will be programmed on and off.
Great,
Yep.
thanks.
I can't resist commenting on Councillor Turley's concern about extra cost. In keeping with his self-announced reputation as being known throughout his life as Tightwad Turley, but also showing concern for the environment. If we don't need the electricity and we don't use it, we don't have to destroy more of the environment to generate it. So I want to thank him quite sincerely for his interest in this. And the LED lights are a great improvement. Councillor Thorpe, the second of our true sports champions on council.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I don't have a question. I just can't resist the opportunity to express my thanks to Mr. Harding for his work and the work of his staff on this project. And I know a number of the original baseball pioneers who had a vision for this stadium are no longer with us, unfortunately, but a number of them still are, and I know that they're just going to be absolutely thrilled with how the stadium has evolved over the past 45 years to where it is now, and it's just going to help bring bigger and better events to our city. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Worship. I should mention too, the Roxman Stadium Society was a good partner in this project. They did contribute $50,000 towards it. With the $1.1 million project, but that's still any kind of contribution helps, and they've been very supportive and helpful to work with. And I do have a whole history of the stadium when Mickey Mantle and who was the other, Jim Purcell came and opened it up, but the clerk said I only had a few moments I could squeeze this in. So again, council, if you want to officially open these up virtually, please do so. We were hoping we do a button, you could turn them on, turn the lights on, but we're just going to make that happen.
And I was looking forward to throwing out a ball, but that's just not going to happen. Mr. Harding, thank you very much, and I'll be very, very quick. I too want to reflect the comments of Councillor Thorpe and Turley and others, and yourself. Thank you to city staff who've worked on this for such a long time. Thank you to all those, in particular the Sir Roxman Stadium Amateur Baseball Association. Their president, Lauren Goodall, is quoted in the press release that's going out today. It's too bad we can't have a proper opening. This is a significant, important expenditure, as Councillor Bonners pointed out. This is a real boost to the city, and as our tourism sector and our hotels are really suffering right now in the long term, this is a very positive step forward, not just for athletics in this community, but also for economic development and employment, and couldn't be more pleased, and congratulations to everybody who's had involvement. Thank you. The next item is Gary, reports, governance processes. Over to you,
Worship. Thank you.
please.
So this item has been put on your agenda today, as this normally would be a Governance and Priorities Committee So it's really meant to be a workshop item. And it was first brought forward by Councillor Thorpe, who wished to bring up the discussion around question period. So I have some history around question period, and I can provide that for you and will. I just, however, want to point out that this really is just for you to workshop through that. If you want to have some discussion around correspondence or any other governance matter, we can do that as well. But Councillor Thorpe had expressed an interest in speaking about question period. Any changes, such as the deletion of no longer having question period or anything like that council wishes to do, would require an amendment to the procedure bylaw. It has been in our procedure bylaw for some time, going back 20 years to 2000. It's been in there where it was open to the public as well as media to ask questions at a council meeting. Recent revisions, the repeal and replacement of the procedure bylaw, made some changes to the section of the bylaw, whereas conduct and decorum was written in, and as well as time limits. So there were those changes made in the procedure bylaw update. But however, it's really up to the chair and council to keep the speakers on task, and any changes that come to the procedure bylaw or question period should really be a council initiative. So over to you. Maybe Councillor Thorpe would like to speak about it.
Councillor Thorpe, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, and I guess Ms. Gurry, now I'm not clear on what the proper forum is for a discussion of things related to our procedure bylaw, such as question period. Is that happening today? I'm quite happy to speak to it today.
Yes, so any discussion that council wishes to have today about changes to the procedure bylaw, when it comes to question period or anything else, you can have that discussion today amongst yourselves, and any further information or possible amendments that you would like, I can go back away and come back to you with it. But this is for you to just have that general discussion to kind of get a consensus of the direction maybe you would like to go.
All right, thank you. So it happens on the weekend that I was looking through our procedure bylaw, and I wondered, as a possible future topic for a GPC meeting, whether council might be interested in simply having a workshop on our procedure bylaw and walking through it and identifying any areas that we might want to look at. If we're going to be specific about question period, COVID, among other things, has forced us to re-examine question period and how it operates or doesn't operate. And I've never been a great fan of our current question period format, quite frankly, and I'm not afraid to say it. I don't think it's a good use of time. I don't think it's been used properly, and I know it has not been used for its original intent. So I would be interested in a discussion and the opinion of other councillors on when things return to our new normal, whether we want to return to what we have been experiencing as question period, or whether we want to do something different or get rid of it. So I'll let others have their say, and I'm happy to speak further to it if we want to debate it today.
Councillor Hemmons, and then Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Given the nature of the GPC conversation, I would actually like to hear from Councillor Thorpe how it's not meeting its original intent and why it's not working for you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Your Worship, certainly. So the original intent of question period, and the city clerk can correct me if I'm mistaken, was that it was designed for members of the media to be able to follow up on topics that had been discussed at a given council meeting. And if they had questions of council or staff to help them flesh out their stories, then that was the time that they could ask it. This, of course, predates the era of emails, direct access, live streaming, and all of the things that we are now accustomed to. So in my experience of question period over the past 6 years, although I've seen it used by the members of the public on a legitimate basis, I have also seen it more often used by members of the public to simply have a chance to come to the podium, give their personal opinion about a topic, ask possibly rhetorical questions, or be critical of staff or council. And there's no reason that those questions or comments could not be directed to council or staff via other means. So I just don't feel it's, as I said, fulfilling its original intent. And Ms. Gurry, can you just confirm that that is correct?
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. So another counselor had actually asked me some months ago to do a little research on this topic as well. So I did go back to several amendments of the old procedure bylaw, and now I know the changes that were made in the new one. And going back 20 years to 2000, it was meant for members of the media and public, so it did say both of those things. However, I do know that it was meant to follow up on council decisions made at that meeting, mostly for media, so they could get their stories right, or basically ask council to comment on why they made the decision that they made. So council would decide on that. So it could have been different in its original intent. I do know that Councillor Thorpe speaks of some of its original spirit of question period has been lost, maybe during his time on council especially, but I also know there was problems with it a little bit before that as well. So it is up to the chair and council to keep the speakers on task and to a question. So having a good, strong chair and the support of council to that chair helps that matter a lot. And there has been some lobbying by members of the public to move the timing of question period. And my thoughts on that, just from a procedural matter, is that the original spirit of it is to ask questions of council on their decisions. And I don't understand the process of having question period at the start of a meeting when the decisions haven't been made. And there is the process of becoming a delegation where you can speak to a matter before council before they've made their decision. So that is one item that has come up a few times during procedure bylaw amendments that that's my rationale for not bringing that forward as an amendment.
So if I may, Your Worship, and I hope I've sort of answered Councillor Hammond's question. I didn't come prepared with any motion today. I'm just curious to if we could have an informal discussion, if nothing else, about what council thinks of question period and what possible formats it could take in the future.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship.
Department.
As a member of the public who's used question period in the past, I'm quite in favor of maintaining it, but I would like to see it expanded in terms of the amount of technology that's at our disposal. I also see questions that come to us as having two themes. One would be of a political nature, like why did you choose to vote that way on that item if they had extra questions. But the other one is, where is the funding coming from that, which I think is a staff-related issue. I think we're responsible to the public, and this is one of the few venues that they have the ability to actually hold us accountable, other than elections. But I think they should have an opportunity throughout the 4 years as opposed to once every 4 years. So I think there's an opportunity for us to expand it. Our first attempt at using social media and email to ferret questions kind of got tracked. However, there are some abilities for a number of questions to be posed, and then for the public to actually vote on the question they like answered. So software is out there available that allows a number of questions to be presented on a particular on a meeting, and then those people who are asking questions also get to vote on the question they like the best. And then at that point, we could have, say, 5 questions come to us. We'd come to the mayor, they'd all be written down, and then the mayor would just, ferret them out or answer them themselves, sort of thing. So I think there's an opportunity here to use technology to make question period better. I quite agree with Councillor Thorpe that we do see a lot of rhetorical questions. We see preambles that can sometimes go on for indefinite periods of time, and that doesn't help. But I think there might be a way to streamline it and make it more efficient so that more people can actually participate in it. Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I have very similar thoughts to Councillor Bonner. I'm not sure about all the new technology, etc., but I'm uncomfortable with the idea of us not having the public have the ability to come before us and ask us a question. I do believe we have to keep it streamlined. I think that we do need to educate when you're coming before us that speak to an item that we were making the decision on. It has been where we've given latitude to people, but democracy is sometimes uncomfortable. Sometimes democracy is about giving latitude to people to have their voice heard, and for that reason, I'm uncomfortable with changing it at this time.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. I probably should know the answer to this, but I have to confess I don't. Is there a time limit on each question?
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Councillor Turley. The new procedure bylaw put in a 5-minute time limit for the person to ask their question and for council to respond. So it's 5 minutes total per question.
So if he rambles on for 5 minutes, he doesn't get an answer. Or she, yeah.
So if I understand the history correctly, and I think I do, and I'm going to summarize it, there must have been a time when obviously either the mayor and or council didn't seem too anxious to answer questions of the media at the close of council meetings. And so this practice is brought in almost to ensure that any good politician who happened to be elected to council did their job, which was to respond to the media, and people would read the local paper and determine from that what was the reasoning behind a particular vote or a decision. And I must admit, I'm more sympathetic to Councillor Thorpe's position this morning than I am to the positions that have been stated by Councillors Bonner and Martman. In my observation, watching this and the individuals who often appear, it seems to me that question period has been more frequently used as a forum to get your face out in the public and potentially be used as part of future political campaigns. And there's nothing wrong with that, trying to bring attention to yourself in our political world. But I have to ask myself, what great problem are we trying to solve with question period in this city? I think any good politician at the close of a meeting and the media are there is going to answer the questions. Candidly now, we sometimes don't even have the media paying attention, and of course with COVID that's changed, but assuming we go back to some sort of normal where there's someone from the press sitting in the gallery and prepared to ask questions, then it behooves us to do our job, which I think is to be open and transparent with the public. It's why I'm always happy when council states their individual positions on a particular vote or motion that's contentious. I'm not sure that any great value is served, to be quite candid, apart from the appearance of transparency and democracy, which everyone chatters on about. Because at the end of the day, 20 years ago, if you didn't read it in the paper, chances are you didn't know about it, or if it got to a TV station if it was really controversial. Now, literally, if you get to make a mistake and shake a hand in a public place or don't wear your mask, it's on Twitter, it's on Facebook, it's all over the universe. The concept of any private moment is largely gone. If you answer a question, even by email to a constituent, so to speak, I'll guarantee that there will be some people who will take chunks out of your email and put those on their Facebook or whatever, and may or may not interpret or leave you with a fair summary of what you actually had to say in a given issue. I mean, historically, that's what we trusted the media to do. It was called responsible journalism. You didn't take a line out of context or a position and use it as a method to advance an editorial position of a paper or a news outlet or whatever the case may be. I don't know that I'd want to eliminate it, but it seems to me that we have a question period which almost invariably, unless someone can go back and look at the numbers, involves similar individuals asking similar rhetorical questions that Councillor Bonner's referred to. Those questions get asked in social media, they get answered, we all get piles of emails. I mean, the amount of correspondence that any politician receives now, and by correspondence I mean emails in particular, or communication through other methods, is horrendous. With great respect, I'm happy to do it, I accept it as part of the job, but I spend a lot of time just answering inquiries and emails and responding to commentary. When you consider, say, 100 years ago, when if you wanted to correspond with your politician, you had to actually put pen to paper and put a stamp on it, and, well, not to a member of parliament, and ship it off, and hopefully someone will respond. The level of communication now is overwhelming. The level of information, I would argue, is overwhelming. So what I want to hear from the councillors today is, who are you serving with question period? What value is there to it, and is it worth the expense? You know, we live stream RDN meetings. No disrespect to the RDN, but I understand what we had, is it 11 viewers or?
I think that's exaggerating.
I'm not far off in terms of who's actually paying attention. And you know, if we were doing something untoward or engaging in subterfuge, or it was a serious problem, I'd be more inclined to think this was an important issue. But I'm not convinced, in a world that's in the middle of an economic collapse and a COVID pandemic and 600 homeless people in the streets, that the existence of question period and ensuring that somebody gets to come up here and ask a rhetorical question and take a whack at us can't be served through all the other social media opportunities that exist, or letters to the editor, or maybe securing a TV camera if we say something really stupid or controversial. I'm just not overly convinced. I'm not saying I would vote to eliminate it, but again, I'm not convinced that it's that significant a problem that it requires us to expand it, or engage in potentially expensive technology, or involve more people in order to ensure that the small number of folks who have an interest get their opportunity for public display of their questions. On the issue of correspondence, again, I mean, that's a much bigger topic. All the emails we each get individually or to mayor and council, are we going to put them on a public agenda? Are we going to have them on every list, available every week? How are we going to pull those forward? What's important? What topics? I am an old-fashioned believer in representative democracy. In the BC legislature, the federal parliament, people don't get to sit in the gallery and yell down questions. They don't. If there's something particularly controversial, as soon as that politician steps out in the corridor, the press falls all over them, they ask them whatever questions they want. If you allow everyone to participate in the meeting, with great respect, governance and process and effective management, I think, get damaged. I'm not saying that's the case now, but that's the end result of all of that. We live in a representative democracy. We get elected here to represent the people. We are responsible to them. Yes, you should face more elections, and a good responsible politician responds to correspondence and phone calls and conversations in the street. I'm sure all of you get stopped in the hardware store or the grocery store just like I do, and that's what you do. But again, are we going to, with correspondence, have it all out there? And if so, again, whose interests are we serving and what value is there to it? I'm not convinced that the amount of concern around this issue is necessarily worth it. In any event, I'm sure I'm going to hear from all of you now because I've inspired a few. Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm not in favor of, well, first of all, I think question period functions fine. It's not as effective as I think it possibly could be, but that's engaging with the public. That's what that looks like. I wouldn't be in support of growing the question period program. We've seen what it looks like, I think, to bring in questions from social media, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, I think engaging with the public and having the public have a forum in which they can have an audience with all of council is something that I think it's a value I hold, and I think it's one that a number of our community hold. And when someone takes the time to handwrite me a letter, which, you know, we've all received and it has my address, they've stamped it, you know, they haven't messaged me through social media, they haven't emailed me even, I sit up a little more, and it's the same for people who come and pay attention in the gallery and then ask us questions at the end. It's a level of participation that I want to continue to support, and I don't think we should be, for lack of a better term, doing away with it because it maybe isn't as effective as we want it to be. We could offer some education, some tips, et cetera, but doing away with it simply doesn't feel comfortable for me. Even if it doesn't function with its original intent, which was for media, I think it now functions with intent for the community. So, yeah, I'm definitely in favor of keeping.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I have no problem having question period, but I would like to see a couple of changes made. Number one, I think 5 minutes is excessive. I think we should cut it back to 2 minutes, because if you can't ask or even 1 minute, if you cut it back to 2 minutes, if you can't ask your question and get an answer within 2 minutes, you're talking too much. Unless it's a really, really long-winded question, and I've yet to see one like that. And the other thing that I think we should be cognizant of is when we have long meetings, which occasionally we do, and we have to go past 11 o'clock, I think that should automatically rule out question period for that meeting. So,
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. I'd yield the floor if anybody else wanted to speak first.
Thank you. Mr. Rudolph.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just thought I'd share some information based on my, still have relatively good contacts in the Lower Mainland and just the experience on this. So firstly, there's 3 points I want to make. First, the council meeting under our governance structure is really a business meeting for you. The council meetings are your business meeting. You're making decisions. You've done your due diligence, and there are pieces of the agendas that provide for delegations and that type of thing. But the primary purpose of the council meeting is business. Now, you could also have a piece of engagement attached to all or some of those meetings, and that's where you kind of get into this business of more than just asking the question. So it's really, what is the function of the council meeting? It's really, there are other mechanisms to do the engagements piece, but there's a balance, and it's really up to council to decide that. The second is, my observation in having seen these other municipalities is there's been a trend towards restricting them because it's been found, and I saw this personally, that there was usually a critical few people that were the regular participants in that, and they took it upon themselves to actually sometimes get a little bit entitled. There was a sense of entitlement that went with that, and so I find a lot of the municipalities got to a place where they were restricting it to 2 minutes, maybe 2 questions. All kinds of rigor, even the number of questions they would entertain at the meeting were limited. So that's definitely the trend, is to have 2 minutes or something like that, and really keep it to a question as opposed to a narrative. So in fact, the city I was before, just I came here, was Abbotsford, and they decided that to get rid of question period because it became a problem for them. And through the years I was there, I didn't hear any particular concern expressed by the public, because they seem to find avenues to do that. So it was rather shocking to me to a certain extent that happened. But yeah, there's so many other mechanisms, I guess people were satisfied with that. The third piece, and this is relevant to this room, is because council authorized some of the surplus budget to be allocated for technological upgrades in this particular room. We're in a position we're getting close to finalizing a technological solution to upgrade the technology in this room, so we have that reliability piece, which may enable us to go down the direction that Councillor Bonner is talking about more engagement during meetings and all that type of thing. So I'll keep you posted on that, but this is a building that's been unfortunately, the software and all the technology that supports this room and this building is very dated and not even supported anymore. So we've had to replace that. So we'll get to a place where we'll be in a better spot to deliver and have that confidence that we'll be able to do that at some point in time. But we're struggling actually right now, as you know, to keep the integrity of our technology supporting you and the basics of the functionality of the meeting. So I just wanted to mention those 3 points. So we're not isolated in this. This is a conversation that other municipalities have. It appears from most municipalities that I see that there's been a trend to tighten it up or allow it, but keep it fairly tight. And that when you said the 5 minutes to 2, it sort of reminded me, I remember that with a number of municipalities, that's kind of where they ended up going for whatever reason. And it's usually just because the number of people actually attending council meetings has started to become less and less and less because they're watching at home and are doing that way. So maybe the way is to do the virtual at some point in time, not sure. Just wanted to share that.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. Like Councillor Thorpe, I think there's times where I can definitely, my perception is that question period is being abused in the sense that no question is being asked and more statements are just being made. Sometimes it's not even under the guise of a rhetorical question, it's just that obvious. But with that said, I don't, as a year and a half in, as frustrating as that can be sometimes, especially when it's late and kind of want to get home, I don't think the problem is significant enough that I would sort of throw out that process for that particular problem. I very much agree with Councillor Turley's comments around, I think, maybe tightening the time on that, because if question period, and I think rightfully so, comes at the end, it should essentially be a question of clarification. Maybe it is how a particular councillor voted, or maybe it's a technical aspect of something in the report. Where's the funding coming from? So fundamentally, the decision has already been made, and points of clarification, I think, should be questions of clarification, not wanting to debate a decision that has been made. If that is the case, if a particular member of the public doesn't like a decision, there is a process for council to reconsider it, and that requires reaching out and having a much more nuanced, I think, conversation with councillors as individuals, and they can exercise their individual ability to request reconsideration. So I do think it needs to be tightened, and I do think it can be problematic, but that's just the way it is. And, I think it would be a very different issue for me if after a year and a half I found, at the end of every meeting, it felt like a half an hour was being taken up by people that weren't asking questions, but I just don't think that's proven to be the case to date. And if it did become that way, I would wholeheartedly support changes that streamlined it. While I have the mic, so I don't need to come back on the question of correspondence. I do have a question to Ms. Curry. Is there currently a process for getting a piece of correspondence on the agenda? And
Thank you, Worship. So we do have a piece in our procedure bylaw titled Petitions and Communications. And correspondence was removed from the last procedure bylaw because it's contained under consent items. However, it's the same thing. Though when writing this procedure bylaw and then writing over it and redoing it and amending it, it's very old-fashioned in the sense that petitions and communications mean the handwritten letter with the postage and/or the petitions that have been walked around and signed by a number of people, signatures, and those types of things. And correspondence, as you all know as councillors, has changed significantly in the last 20-plus years. So there is a process to how it's received and when it would be when it would go to a council meeting, and it says in the bylaw that the corporate officer makes that determination, and if there's an appeal by a member of the public that would like it to come, and I've said no for whatever reason, then they could appeal to the CAO, my decision. However, if a member of council wanted it to come to a council meeting, they've received an item of correspondence, because all of the correspondence you do receive, whether it's attached to an email, written and sent via post, or your emails that are sent to mayor and council, you all receive a copy of that in one form or another. If you wanted one of those pieces of correspondence to come to a council meeting, right now we ask, it's informally, it's not written, and there's no procedure written out. We ask that you ask the mayor myself and Mr. Rudolph to have it added, or you could always bring it as a late item to a meeting and have council vote on it that way. However, I could see that being bogged down and maybe not the smoothest process, so that is why I added it to the agenda. I'm kind of thinking of ways where that process could be streamlined. And then back to the comments, just further to Mr. Rudolph's comments on question period, there was a couple of things about the technology and the improvements that will be made in this room, which is wonderful and much needed. However, the e-town halls that we do, they take about a month for us to prepare, and I would be concerned about some sort of a software for question period for a few reasons, and that's the moderation of those questions, making sure they weren't liable or defamatory or inappropriate, because that seems to be the way things happen when you're not standing here in person. Some people can say things they wouldn't say if they were face to face. So I'd be worried about that. I'd be worried about the cutoff. I'd be worried, like, the cutoff time to asking your questions, and then the staffing that it would take to review those questions, reading out those questions if that was part of the process. I know I wouldn't be comfortable reading out some of the questions that may be received. So there's a number of things that I would really like to thoroughly investigate for that process, should council wish to go forward on that. So, sorry, I answered you and then went on.
Thank you, thank you. Thanks, Your Worship, and thank you, Ms. Fury. I actually, that didn't come to mind about adding a piece of correspondence as a late item, which actually seems like quite an effective process if there was a disagreement between the mayor and a councillor on whether something should be added. So I think, to me, that process would work, and just being aware of it. And just quickly, to Councillor Hammond's point about folks that write letters, I think the last letter I wrote was to Santa Claus, so maybe there's a little generational gap there between what includes correspondence.
I wrote one the other day. People like getting them. It gives them something to do as they try and decipher my handwriting. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Some comments here. I think a limiting question period would send a wrong message. I think the principle behind it of having access of the public to ask questions to council it's a good principle, and something that I think everybody stands behind around transparency. I can definitely say at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, when there's sort of rhetorical questions being asked, the frustration builds, and I think that tightening up the process would be critical going forward, and there's been some good suggestions around how to tighten it up. I think constraining the amount of time that the person has to speak. I think also potentially the timing. For example, if we finish before 9, having it at the end of the council meeting, but say if we have a question period every time, then if we hit 9 o'clock, there's a question period right at 9 for a set amount of time, 10 or 15 minutes for the long meetings. And then also I think part of tightening up the rules and the procedural bylaw around question period is also tightening up the facilitation. I think that before question period starts, I think it's important to front load the rules and the clear purpose of question period, ask questions of clarity so that everybody's in understanding before they get to the podium, and it makes it much easier for the chair to shut things down when people go off track. So I would definitely entertain a motion to tighten up question period and put some bit more rules around it. In terms of technology, I very much like the idea of pursuing different technological ways for engagement. I think that it's something that we should always be investigating and trying out, and it does take effort and resources to do that, and I hope in the future, it's not a burden to be able to do that type of experimentation, that we have, enough firepower in the IT department and that to be constantly looking at these items. I think there are some technologies out there currently. There's one company that comes to mind where There's a very simple, easy access porthole that the public can go to, and anybody can write questions. And there's an algorithm that ranks all the questions with the number of people who have applied to them, and then it actually will just spit out the top 5 questions that people have agreed on. And then, you know, if the computer program takes care of all that information, and staff only have to vet 5 questions before a council period, or you know, during a council, it might make it a little bit more realistic to have questions that are coming online to the council meeting. But these are all things that will take some time to investigate. And then, yeah, with correspondence, I think, yeah, it's important that council has a way, if there's correspondence that we would like put on the agenda, to put it forward. And sort of from the discussion I'm hearing that we can put it as a late item, or if there's a piece of correspondence that we'd like to have on the agenda, we talk to the mayor and legislative services and the CAO and can get it on. Is that correct?
They're kind of 2 different processes. Letting the clerk's office know beforehand that you would like to bring this forward as a late item would manage you to bring it here, and then before you voted on the agenda as amended, you would vote on that late item individually, and so you would all be able to vote on whether or not to add that item. If you did, you would vote on the agenda as amended, including that late item, and if you didn't, you would vote on the agenda without being amended to include that late item. So there's that way, or there's the other way that we've kind of used so far, but it's informal, where the mayor, CAO, you let us know you want it added, and we just put it on the agenda for you. So there's those 2 different ways.
Okay, great. The other question I have is, say, if a community group or somebody would like correspondence be put on the agenda as official correspondence, is there a pathway to request that through staff?
Thank you, Worship, through you to Council Gesselbrock. That's the process that is outlined in the procedure bylaw. So there is a way for them to do that, and it's through me and my office.
Right, excellent. Perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. So we've blended a couple of things here together, and I know there's lots of other probably more weighty things on our agenda. Correspondence wasn't a concern of mine. I'm personally quite happy with the way we handle it right now. Going back to question period, as I said before, I was just looking for an informal discussion, which I appreciate hearing. I wouldn't be interested in expanding it. But I'm quite happy to suggest that, well, first of all, as I said, I didn't come with any motions, and I don't believe in motions on the fly, and I'm not going to make any motions. I'm quite happy to continue with question period as we've experienced it in the past when we do get back to so-called normal. And I think we can informally monitor how it's used and who uses it and how long they take. And we have a strong chair who can control it quite effectively. So I'm quite happy to go along with that. And if we find in future that there is a need to tweak it or re-examine it, then we can do so at that time. So I was just looking for the conversation, and I don't know how much more time council wishes to spend on this, but that's all I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Before I go to Councillor Bonner, I want to say thank you for the kind words, Councillor Thorpe, but I don't treat myself as a strong chair when it comes to question period. I've let people ramble on, but a year and a half plus into this job, hoping we do return to some kind of normal, I may be that strong chair in terms of cutting people off that you've suggested, particularly if it's individuals who are frequenting here all the time and asking what are essentially rhetorical questions that Councillor Bonner referred to earlier. I think people have to step back once in a while and remember, we're paid a set salary, so to speak, and we're here all the time for however long the meeting takes, and I accept that. That's one of the joys of public service, and it's an honor and privilege to do this. But when we keep the lights on, to tease Councillor Turley about Sir Roxman Stadium, when we keep staff here, when we keep building staff here, when we keep everybody here, so someone can have their 15 minutes of fame that Woody Allen or Andy Warhol, I can't remember who, I think it was Andy Warhol, promised all of us. I I will be a much harsher person when it comes to cutting off some of that in the future, and we'll see what folks have to say about it and how the public reacts. We have a duty to the broader community, I think, that we have to consider. Councillor Bonner, it looks like you're going to get the last word today.
Thank you. That's very unusual. Appreciate that. I'm going to be short and sweet. Thank you, Councillor Thorpe, for your words there. I hear what you're saying. My comments regarding expanding it wasn't so much making it longer or bigger or anything like that. It was more along the way of expanding the way in which we can accept questions as opposed to that. But still, I do think we need to keep a close hand on it. In the past, having been to many council meetings where lots of questions were asked, I found that it wasn't so much the person asking the question that delayed the meeting, it was most of the people on this side who talked a very, very long time and loved to debate the person asking the question. And I don't think I've ever seen a media ask a question. I may be wrong, but I can't remember one. But in nowadays, who is the media? Right, like that's the big question now. Like if I ask a question and I have 5,000 people following me on Twitter, am I now the media? Right. So I'm getting the no from there, but but the question is mostly, and in terms of people running for council next and wanting to get their fame out there, we actually had a lot of really good questions from people who've never run for council and probably never will. People who are historians of our city and had very pointed questions. And speaking to that, what I see as question period is an opportunity for someone to ask what they consider a very important question, hopefully, and having a council ask them, but not only answer to them, but answer to the entire public who's out there on streaming, which I'm sure is way more than 11. So we should be prepared at any given time to be able to answer these questions, but answer it to the entire public if we can. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Bonner, but Councillor Brown wants the last word.
Of course, with your discretion, Your Worship, I would like to put forward a motion, and that is that the procedural bylaw be amended during the next housekeeping changes to limit the question time per individuals to 2 minutes.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes, sorry, I was scribbling it. That the procedure bylaw, during the next housekeeping changes, be amended to limit the question time per individuals to 2 minutes.
For a council meeting.
Yes, and it's essentially not in a rush. That's hence why, as these things come, more housekeeping, usually housekeeping amendments get identified. But it's just, I think Councillor Turley's point was a good one, and just if you have a legitimate question and you're wanting point of clarification, it doesn't take 5 minutes to ask it.
And Councillor Hartman, seconded? Yes.
Worship, just a point of clarification. Just a point of clarification on that. Is it 2 minutes per question or 2 minutes per person?
Per person.
Okay. Thank you. Because I recall sometimes an individual might have 6 or 7 questions or take turns with another person having to, so it's per person? They might have multiple topics on the agenda they'd like to ask questions about, that's all.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. I believe that I would bring forward during the housekeeping, I think I would do 2 minutes per question. I think that was the understanding I received from Councillor Turley, but I might also bring forward the possibility for Council to limit the entire question period itself to 15 minutes and or 10, or give you some options around that. But my understanding, and Councillor Brown, behind your motion is 2 minutes per question. And then if somebody has multiple questions, they could have more time?
Well, I had specifically put per individual.
Per individual, yeah.
But I'm happy to entertain amendments to that if someone's...
I think this is precisely why I'm with Councillor Thorpe. You never want to do these, no disrespect, these motions on the fly, because the first thing it starts to generate is a series of questions about what it looks like, which is why you might want to consider the ramifications of it. I mean, even I, who am not a fan particularly, as
Your
Mr.
worship.
Rudolph has pointed out, if it's a controversial agenda and maybe a wise, intelligent, thoughtful individual has 3 good, solid questions and it's going to, exactly, like Councillor Bonner in his pre-election days. And maybe, you know, we shouldn't be limiting that. And if we limit it to 15 minutes with great respect, again, is this fair in what might be a very controversial decision that engenders a great deal of public interest? So, Ms. Gurry, you wanted to say something before I go to Councillor Hemmons?
Yeah, Your Worship, there'll be a report when the procedure bylaw comes for the housekeeping amendments and we include this change. There'll be a report that accompanies it and it'll have options. So 2 minutes per individual, 2 minutes per question, time limit on the whole section and provide council some options. And then you have time to have that discussion first before actually amending the bylaw. So it'll come back again with everything I've heard here and some options to consider.
Councillor Brown, Councillor Martin, does that seem a reasonable approach to you?
Yeah, just a point, I think it's not totally related to this, but this comes up time and time again, and I don't understand the point of these workshops if we're not going to follow with motions, because when I see them, I spend a lot of time reading our procedure bylaw, researching what other jurisdictions are doing. So I think the intention of these sessions needs to be much more clear.
Councillor Hemmons. Councillor Gussie-Brock, you're on my list, don't worry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I also believe that we should, if it's appropriate, make motions from these conversations. I think that's the point of having the conversation. I personally won't be supporting any amendments or any changes because I think just like the conversations in the grocery store and just like the conversations when I'm pumping my gas, this is part of my job and it's a very small part of my job. And to offer people, the public, an opportunity to come and speak to us and not limit them to one question or to one topic or to a certain timeline. I think I trust in you as a chair to keep us on track and to make sure that, you know, we're not here at 11:30 at night and keeping staff up. I just think we're making a bigger problem about this than really exists. This is a very small piece of what we do, and I think it's a very important piece of what we do. So I don't think we should be changing anything.
Councillor Gussie-Brock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too, just voice a little bit of frustration as well. Like I think that it is, when we have these workshops, we have a set time to actually discuss options and move business forward. And I think that it's a completely appropriate time to put motions and recommendations forward and workshop a little bit so that we get it right. We've had this discussion about question period on the agenda for like 4 months, and we're finally talking about it, and then if we don't do anything about it, then it just becomes a festering sore ongoing, and we wonder why nothing's happening. So I appreciate Councillor Brown putting a motion forward for discussion. I think that we do need question period to be more effective and a little bit more boundary around it, given most municipalities are facing the same thing and are doing the same thing, is a wise thing to do. And I support 2 minutes, and I also support Ms. Gurry to come back to council with some options about how we could tighten it up and allow us to make a decision at that point on different options. Thank you.
Ms. Gurry, do you wish to?
Yes, Your Worship, I just wanted to speak to this workshop. And this is under the guise of a special council meeting. However, it is and was scheduled to be a Governance and Priorities Committee. And there is nothing that prohibits council at either a GPC and or a council meeting to make a motion. And after you've workshopped an idea, and this is definitely a Governance and Priorities Committee workshop type discussion that was planned as this, even though it's a special council meeting, council can make motions. And it's helpful for staff in the sense that we have a motion on the books to then follow as well. So I just wanted to not discourage that from happening.
Thank you. I think I took exactly the same attitude. This is like a GPC. This is a chance to discuss it, and quite frankly, there may be public feedback that will arise out of the discussion. assuming that individuals have been actually listening and watching this morning to see what we have to say. Councillor Thorpe.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate the comments of Ms. Gurry, and I agree with them. I guess what I saw was this leading to a more detailed and longer workshop at a GPC meeting specifically on our procedure bylaw. And I know, Ms. Gurry, it gets altered and amended from time to time. I personally would like to see council have the opportunity to go through it line by line and say, is this good? Do we like this? Do we want to change this? And I know that would be a lengthy conversation, but I saw this as being one component of that. And seeing as I didn't hear earlier any great concerns about question period as it is per se, I was the one who brought it forward. It's caused some good discussion. I guess I'm just not in a rush to make a quick amendment right now. But that's just me.
Your Worship, I can definitely add the procedure bylaw to a future GPC discussion for next year in maybe 6 months' time and/or before if the amendments and housekeeping come before that. Some of the things in the procedure bylaw are required under the community charter, so you won't be able to remove them even if you want to.
So, friends, council? Exactly.
Oh, I
There's a
have a
motion on
question.
the floor. Councillor Turley?
So I just want to confirm the motion on the floor is that we request the staff to provide a report, or that we ask to have the amendment done at a future time.
Your Worship, the motion is that the procedure bylaw during the next housekeeping amendments be changed to allow for 2 minutes per individual for question period. And with that motion that's been seconded, I would bring back some options that are slightly different than that for council to choose before it was actually amended.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Your Worship. I thought I had the last one a while ago. I'm not particularly in favor of this motion, but Lord knows I love motions on the fly. It makes for much more interesting meetings. And I agree entirely with the councillors that that's what I assume that these GPCs would be doing, is it would be just tossing things out there and eventually come up with there. I think what we do need, though, is maybe some framework into making the decisions. Like, I'm not opposed to the concept of limiting it to 2 minutes, but I think there's much more to question period than just that. So I'd rather us do the whole thing all up at once and have a nice report come back. But I don't think I'd just vote for this motion as it sits.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. As the conversation goes, I think we're drifting further and further, so it might just make sense to have this conversation. I'm starting to agree with Councillor Thorpe here, where there's a bunch of different perspectives now. It's growing in scope. It might just make sense to have this conversation properly workshopped in its entirety at a GPC, rather than asking staff to make these little changes here and there. 'Cause it seemed like we were sort of focused on one issue, but as the conversation goes, it's getting bigger and bigger. So I would move to defer any consideration until this has been properly workshopped.
Is there a seconder?
Your Worship, before that happens, Councillor Brown could just withdraw the motion with agreement from the seconder, and we could have the procedure bylaw brought forward to a future GPC meeting for discussion and to go through all of the aspects of it, if that would be. So if Councillor Brown wants to withdraw and there's agreement from Councillor Martman, then you could make a new motion that the procedure bylaw be brought forward to a future GPC meeting for discussion.
Unless I'm seeing some strong objection, that seems a very sensible course. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Worship, and not to gild a dead horse here, but I'm suggesting also that we kind of have where we want to be at the end of the GPC, and I would expect recommendations from staff and saying, okay, at the end of your conversation, these are our recommendations, and we would work towards them, because just as seen today, we just said, okay, now we're going to talk about question period, and we actually don't know where we're heading. Other than that, we're all just going to voice our opinions on. So there's just a suggestion. Thanks.
Sometimes to make progress, you have to discuss where you're going to go. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a little bit of discussion, reflection on process. I think that it's interesting watching how things went, and it kind of scattered, and now I'm kind of not sure, where it's landing again. We had a discussion today about question period, and it's now expanded into reviewing the procedural bylaw at an upcoming GPC. If I did hear issues raised about question period, and there is, I would say, a majority consensus that maybe a few things need to be adjusted to it. My hope, even after this discussion, would be that there's a motion made to staff to bring forward options on some potential changes, and that would come maybe when we have a discussion about the wider procedural bylaw. And from what I hear from Ms. Gurry, that's the sense that I'm kind of understanding, that staff is understanding this. But I think having a motion coming out of this discussion would provide clear direction, so that when we do come back with the procedural bylaw review, there could be some recommendations about question period that we can have a more productive discussion at, and actually just sort of move business forward. Because, I'm not sure when the next time this is going to come back to GPC. Then we'll have another discussion about question period, and then it just, a year down the line after this is brought up 6 months ago, and it's just like, this is not the pace that we need to be operating at. So, thank you.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. So I definitely would be bringing forward the items and recommendations for question period going forward when Council did review the procedure bylaw at a future Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. And the one thing, though, about bringing recommendations forward and why this wasn't done today, and it was specifically just outlined for your discussion, is because this is political in nature, and question period, items that are changeable and not legislated or not requiring logistically staff purposes requirements in the procedure bylaw really need to come from council. I don't want staff and or myself putting like that political spin on things. So it really does need, the direction and recommendations do need to come from you. So that's why recommendations on those changes weren't brought to you today. And what I did hear from you today will be brought forward then. However, unless it's logistically not working for legislative services, I will need you to have those discussions again on maybe some options on what you can do and can't do, or what other municipalities are doing. But besides question period, which I think you've covered today, any other kind of political type motions or recommendations, you'll need to workshop out yourself then too.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gurry. The motion is withdrawn. We will have an opportunity to come at this again. I think it's been a most useful and interesting discussion. And the motion brought forward did encourage some further specificity around potential outcomes or effects of that motion, straightforward and simple as it might be. And there's a reason why we do this. Even in the legislature, at the end of the day, the government is in power, but the government introduces the bill. It doesn't get debated the first day. It then has a general debate around the principles. It then goes to committee stage, where any member of the legislature can ask questions till the cows come home, essentially, around the bill, the government justifying each section of the bill in order, and then it's going to go for eventual passage. Sometimes there are amendments, but the point of it is that you don't deal with it, so to speak, quickly. And by that, I don't mean to say that we're being obstreperous or difficult about this, but these decisions have consequences and we need to think about them. It's the reason we have staff reports. It's when Cabinet gets a proposal, it goes through a much more complex process before even Cabinet debates it, before it eventually works its way into legislative drafting, before it works its way into a bill, before it gets introduced to the House. And there's a reason for all of this. It's process and it's important. And it has a value, and we shouldn't underestimate the value of the discussion we had this morning either, just about this. I mean, again, I'm not going to change my position. This is a fairly small item in the great context of this stuff even we have to deal with at the present time as council. But having the discussion is always useful, but it's messy and it takes a while, which is what sort of Councillor Hemmond said about question period. It's just part of the process. So. Thank you very much, everyone. I would now happily entertain a procedural motion to proceed in camera. Councillor Bonner, Councillor Brown seconding. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Any opposed, I should say? No?
Your worship, and if you just want to pause for one moment, we'll make sure all the streaming is done. And then I believe there's a scheduled recess to occur first, so.
Hey, Tiana. Hey. It sure is the coldest rink in town.
Oh, yeah, buddy! Nice save, James!
Wow, your goalie is keeping you guys in the game. Cheers.
Oh, man, that's hot.
Sorry, that's the way I like it. Oh. Go, 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 go! Penalty shot!
Scalds from hot drinks are a leading cause of hospitalization for children under 5.
2 minutes, stand in the front, unsportsmanlike conduct.
Hot tea and coffee will cause serious burns to a child in less than a second.
Got it, kid? Use the lid.
Welcome to the city's South Fork Water Treatment Plant. This is where we take water that we collect in our lakes and rivers, pipe it, we filter it and treat it before we send it off to the city's distribution system in your taps. This facility actually does a better job than most home filtration systems. The water that comes into your home that you use every day, that you bathe in every day, that you wash your clothes in every day, is cleaner than anything you can get anywhere. Here you see filtration in action. It's kind of like watching paint dry. There's nothing to really see. But if you look in the tank, you'll see the froth on the top. That's dissolved organic matter, and when we aerate the tank, that froths up, and that's why that's up there. We take all the little particles, all the organic matter, any insects or bugs that might be in the water, and pathogens that we're trying to filter out, they're all gone. We filter the water using a series of membranes. So what we're looking at here is a membrane filtration module. So when I talk about the membranes filtering the water, this is what we're filtering the water with. And while you might think that the water flows through like the baleen of a whale, it's not true. These are hollow fiber membranes. So each of these little tiny strands are hollow, just like a shoelace. And the membrane is wrapped around the outside of these tiny little hollow fibers. So these sit in a bath of water, raw water, and then we pull the water through the wall of the straw or the shoelace, and then it travels along and it collects in this vessel at the end here. And this hole at the end is where we pull the water out. And the membranes are like an almost impermeable waterproof layer that we pull the water through. So now we're just left with clean, pure drinking water. Take care.
This is the 2018 redux of the lighting at Nanaimo's historic bastion. I've had the pleasure of being part of the relighting project on this amazing building in downtown Nanaimo. So what we did is we've replaced the original high-pressure sodium lights, which basically did an okay job of lighting up the bottom 10 feet of the building, and replaced them with modern LED lighting that has the capacity to change color. We can run through a number of different colors that we have pre-programmed here in a pink, a purple, a green. Probably my favorite on here is Rainbow Chase for Pride Week. It'll actually run all the way around the building all the time.
With this new technology, organizations can now request that the bastion be lit to promote their cause by going to the City of Nanaimo website and following the instructions. Go to Your Government, Bastion Lighting Requests, complete the lighting request form, and submit. You will hear from us within a couple days if your request has been approved, and the bastion will be lit in the colors that you have requested. If you have any questions, please contact the Mayor's office at 250-755-4400.
So the next time you're in downtown Nanaimo at night, come on and check out the new dynamic lighting at The Bastion.
What we have here is the Real Ice technology that was installed at the Nanaimo Ice Center. It allows us to use cold water from traditionally hot water that we used to use for making ice. Basically, the water will come in through the bottom, go in through a vortex idea, making the air bubbles microscopic in size, which makes a better, more dense sheet of ice.
Differences that you'll see with the Real Ice is there's less snow developed, so that's easier for cleaning, and also it's a denser, harder, clear ice. So the ice skaters will certainly enjoy that. And the city plans to implement Real Ice at our other 2 arenas as well. Some of the other efficiencies we've implemented in this facility are LED lights in some areas, and we've also, in the last few years, installed a higher efficiency refrigeration system, which lowers our energy costs. Both Zambonis at our facility are now electrically operated, so there's no harmful emissions, and they're very quiet as well. So what this means for the city is that we're able to use less energy and also reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, which is more beneficial to the environment.
This is a plug catch basin. We have 10,000 plus of these in the city of Nanaimo with over 600 kilometers of road. Maintenance staff can't be everywhere at once, so we don't ask a lot for the city of Nanaimo residents, but if they know that they have one of these catch basins, clear it off with a shovel or a rake. Do not use your hands. If this gets plugged, you could ultimately flood a neighbor around the corner, flood a road, which is prone to hydroplaning. And if you're lucky enough that you have a green bin, by all means, throw the compost into the green bin. And if you don't, throw it into a composting pile. It's just going to make a lot of the roads much more clear once we have the debris lifted off. During a snow event, the catch basin can be plugged with snow. The resident knows the proximity of the catch basin. By all means, grab a shovel or a rake, don't use your hands, and clear it off again. This is ultimately going to save you from flooding, the road, or your neighbor. You know, as much as we want help cleaning the plug catch basins off, please do not assist us by trying to unplug a culvert. Call the city yard. They have 24/7 service. It's 250-758-5222. And also there is sandbags and sand available. Just bring a shovel.
Your Worship. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to reconvene the meeting of council, please. The next item on the agenda, Ms. Gurry, is rise and report. I simply do want to report to the community, as it's become fairly widely known now, that BC Housing, province, the city have announced a memorandum of understanding today that will see the development of 3 affordable rental units with approximately 125 homes for families and individuals, and 4 purpose-built permanent supportive housing developments with approximately 190 homes for people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. It's a landmark memorandum for the city and a very important step to dealing with our extremely significant and tragic, if I may call it that, homeless population and the situation in which they find themselves. So this is a very positive step forward for the city today. And certainly what that means is that right now the province, working in partnership with the city of Nanaimo, will increase the affordable supply of affordable rental housing with more than 880 homes either completed or underway. That is a significant step forward. As many will know, Council in September 2018 endorsed the Nanaimo Coalition on Homelessness's action plan to end homelessness. This is part of that longer-term strategy. And I am hopeful that we are definitely going in the right direction in this city. So I invite anyone to go to the city website and listen to media to get more details, but it is a very good day in Nanaimo on that. On the other hand, I have to tell you there's also been a fire at the historic Bastion, which is not a good day for Nanaimo. And so it reminds us all that in the midst of good news, there are always tempering other aspects to the news that remind us that life is uncertain. The next item after that is reports, council resolution update. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report is for information for council's information on the resolutions that they've passed since January 1st, 2019, up to and including April 15th, 2020. Going forward, staff are hoping to bring these to you in quarterly reports, so it's not as much information for you all to digest and you can stay on top of. This reflects council's work in that past year and a quarter, so there's quite a lot of work that has been accomplished. Page 8 to 83 of the original agenda outlines all of those resolutions of council that have been completed, and page 84 to 89 shows that are still in progress or outstanding. So any questions council has regarding those resolutions would be welcomed, and again, it's just for your information and update.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you to staff for providing this information. We've done a lot of work, it looks like it. Certainly has. We have done a lot of work. We've asked staff to do a lot of work. Let's put it that way. My question is, in terms of the motions that are in progress still, is there any way of understanding when they're going to be acted on, finalized, or brought back to council? They're all just say in progress. And I'm just pulling one out of here is the East Wellington Park Management Action Plan, which took place earlier, the open house took place earlier this year. I just kind of, if there's a way to find out where we're at with that, like it's coming in 2 months or it's coming next week.
Your Worship, I'm not sure if Mr. Harding is here that could answer more specifically, but a lot of these motions have either permits that we're waiting for, sometimes the bylaws need to be adopted, or there are a certain point in the process that would prevent them from being completed at this time. So Mr. Harding.
Mr. Harding, please.
Yes, Your Worship, on bringing back after the open house and then some other work we do and some other stakeholders in the area. The goal was to get it to you at the end of this month. If we don't make it by the end of this month and by the end of August, we'll have a report back.
Yeah, and it wasn't specific that one. I was just wondering, like, how do we find out where this one, a particular motion is at in the system?
Yep.
Mr. Rudolph.
Your Worship, I guess the question is, could we add a column which is when council could expect, or what's the target date, like we do with our annual report and quarter and stuff. That's a good suggestion. We'll try to do that. Would you accept for the next update?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to, I'm assuming Mr. Harding, the one on the community program development grant, Nanaimo Science and Sustainability Society for a Science in the Park summer program. Is that actually happening this year, given the health challenges?
Thank you, Worship. Councillor Turley, yes, the program is happening, and probably some modifications with how they're social distancing and things like that, but it's actually a nice way of offering again some, as we're doing programs in the park too, and moving indoors, outdoors to our parks, that program fits well with that.
Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock. I was going to say, if you press the request to speak, I know you love technology, I will see you and I can punch you up here.
Thank you, Worship. One item I just wish to raise is the plastic bag regulation bylaw. I know this one was put on hold, and some considerations. I know during COVID, there was initially some thought that single-use bags were going to be used to increase hygiene. A lot of stuff is coming out that's debunking that. It's actually more hygienic. And I think right now, with COVID, we have seen a huge spike in single-use items, and that's more going to landfill. And it's also slowed down the province in moving forward with their plastics action strategy. And you know, although COVID has happened, the plastic issue is one that is still a very large problem, and it requires, you know, municipalities and the province to keep moving forward to reduce this waste. And I feel that we should start looking back at this this regulation, one, to deal with it at our municipal end, but also to send, you know, a message to the province that it's okay to keep going down the course of regulating unnecessary waste, especially plastics. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in this item? Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. One more question, if I may. With regard to the downtown event grant recommendations for funding, look at the list, and there's some that obviously aren't going to happen this year, at least highly unlikely, like the downtown market. What happens to the funding?
Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Turley. With some of the downtown grants, money will be returned to the city, and the idea was to possibly put that aside for distribution next year. Some of the organizations have applied to use those funds for something similar that they could put on, and so they have been granted approval to do that. So it's a bit of a mix.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. The other question I had was just around timing around the procurement policy review. I'm just curious, has there been much dialogue, say at the Mayor's Task Force or elsewhere with staff around the procurement initiatives, you know, being part of a COVID recovery plan, and where we are in that process of actualizing our procurement review?
I'm going to let Mr. Rudolph answer that, because I believe we're anticipating a report, and you don't want to get to Christmas.
Yes, Your Worship.
without
Firstly,
stewarding
this is a scheduled topic for your 27th of July council meeting. So we'll be deep diving, and we've bookmarked as much as 2 hours for you, and with a facilitated, it should be pretty deep and thorough. On the Mayor's Task Force, I think elements of this have shown up on virtually every meeting on buying local, and a whole series of conversations around the resiliency and so forth. So it's not the social procurement per se, but the theme of buy local and a whole bunch of things like that. So it's certainly been raised and it's been flagged, but it's not been it was raised, for sure. But, so we don't know exactly what the task force itself will decide to highlight, but they're still in the presentation background phase of their work, so they have another 2 meetings of that, I think, before they kind of sequester themselves back to figure out a strategy and what their major themes are. But yes, it's been mentioned.
Great. Well, I'll look forward to the 27th. Thank you.
If I may, I just want to offer a comment on the report and thank staff for putting it together. I know that the cynical and perhaps the negative and the folks who think that we're over-legislated and regulated in society may take the view that the number of resolutions passed by council is a bad thing, inevitably, because it just means we're doing too much, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're producing anything. And then, of course, I'm reminded of all the press reports I've seen of governments in their dying days when they say they have no legislative agenda and they only passed a small number of bills, et cetera, et cetera. Somewhere in between is the truth, and I think what the number of resolutions indicates is that this council, but in fairness, most particularly staff, who are doing all the work behind the scenes, so to speak, with the direction of council, have produced a substantive number of resolutions that are improving life in this city overall. And I just want to say thank you to council for working so hard, and thank you to staff for supporting council in this work. If no one else is going to say anything, Councillor Gesselbrock.
Sorry. Yeah, a couple other motions I just wanted to check in on. One was Councillor Martin's motion on bottled water. Here, it was moved and seconded that council directs staff to report back to council regarding options for consideration of a bylaw that prohibits the bottling of groundwater within the city of Nanaimo to help protect groundwater today and for the future.
Mr. Sims.
For this one having sort of fallen through the cracks, it becomes a zoning issue. So Mr. Holm is actually active on a report, and it's just been one of those things that we needed to get our heads around first before we did the work on it. But it should be back shortly.
Great, thank you. And the last one I've got here is that it says correspondence from the Office of the Mayor, City of Burnaby, dated May 2nd, 2019, regarding expanding investment opportunities, that council directs staff to prepare a report regarding implications of correspondence from the Office of the Mayor, City of Burnaby, expanded investment opportunities.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. I think that one needs to still have some work done on it as well, and it might have been inappropriately marked as complete. I'm not sure, but we're still.
It says in progress.
Yeah, so we are still doing some work. Mr. Rudolph and I were just discussing this in the preparation of this report, that we still have to do some work on that.
As I recall, it was a fairly general sort of letter, and it's a lot easier to be responsive to something that's specific than it is to blue sky, so to speak, in correspondence. Anything further in this item? Thank you very much. The next is reopening plans and strategies for the City of Nanaimo, COVID-19 recovery plan. Mr. Rudolph, please.
Yes, Your Worship, if I may just briefly introduce this. We've had a staff team working for weeks and weeks now on recovery issues, led by Mr. Van Horn, and others really have contributed a lot. It's been a senior management group and others participating in this. In the meantime, just a quick update on where we are with our service delivery. As you know, we presented this way back in April, I think, when we first came back after the brief break from having meetings with you, that the service delivery model never really did change in terms of practice for the fire departments and police and the public works areas in terms of garbage collection and all those types of things. We did have that serious water break back in the spring, in the middle of all this. In essence, I think for most of the public, they wouldn't have seen a noticeable difference in our services, with the exception, a notable exception, of our Parks, Recreation and Culture function. The other side of it was the City Hall remains closed. Most of the City Halls, if not all that I'm aware of, are generally closed or have very limited access and services available at the counter. We're going to explain that a little bit today. just tell you that the tax time, the significant issue that was to set up that has been very well subscribed. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of people want to come in person, and I don't have last week's numbers, but as of a week ago, we were well over 3,000 people using the wickets at the Frank Crane Arena. That's on top of all the people that have been dealt with outside. We do have customer service reps out front of the SARC building. So all in all, it's been quite a period where we've adjusted, and we're digitally issuing building permits. All the building inspections and so forth continue. So we've adapted, and we still have a percentage of our staff not in person at City Hall. We also have very restricted access to the building for meetings, and I personally have not had any personal meetings with anybody yet, and nobody's really asking for that. So it's all virtual or in a sort of a bigger forum context where there's lots of space. So I'd say there's still a fair amount of trepidation on the parts of some members of staff and the public about this, and then there's others that aren't. And we saw only in the news this weekend where if you go too fast or let your guard down even a little bit, like in the city of Kelowna, not with the City Hall, but it doesn't take long for something to happen. So it's very measured and informed and cautious is our approach. So what we have in front of you today is a very summary sheet of a lot of work that exists in addition to this behind the scenes that we will use for operational guidelines for bringing back our staff and reopening City Hall in due course. And Mr. Van Horn is here to explain what we've done and what's in front of you.
Mr. Van Horn, welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, here today to update Council on the City's COVID recovery plan. Staff are asking for Council's adoption of the plan and to have Council pass the motion in relation to the plan that you see in the report. Ms. Gurry can perhaps explain a little more about the motion in a little bit if there's any questions from Council, and perhaps Ms. Mercer, who I also saw here, could speak to the financial impact section of the document in the attachment for the report. You may recall a number of months back that staff appeared on a department-by-department basis to talk about some of the operational adaptations that we made in order to continue to provide service to the public while recognizing that the buildings were going to be closed to public access. These adaptations enabled us to maintain our services, but we delivered them in a way, obviously, to limit the possible impacts of COVID-19 for our staff and for transmitting it through the public. Today, we're back to talk about what's happening behind the scenes to keep the city safely operating and how we're planning to gradually resume more normal operations and programming with a view to getting back as much as possible to that which we left in mid-March. We closed our facilities to the public in mid-March, but continued to provide services where we could safely do so, and that obviously involved a little bit of creativity, as Mr. Rudolph just alluded to, for example, with tax collection out at Bevan Park. A significant number of our staff, primarily in recreation, were without work during this time. Some were redeployed to other temporary positions within the city. Some office-based staff work from home, and a majority of our workforce, the majority of them in Public Works, Parks and Trails, and Nanaimo Fire Rescue, Police Services, and SARC and City Hall, remained at work under a number of new health and safety procedures, performing what the province had deemed to be essential work. This slide outlines, at least at a high level, how we intend to get from where we were in mid-March through our staged recovery process to where we want to be, which will likely be when a vaccine is widely available. We've consistently followed the recommendations of the BC Centre for Disease Control and the Provincial Health Officer, and where aspects of dealing with COVID-19 have been handed off to organizations such as WorkSafe BC or similar organizations, we've informed ourselves of what their requirements are to make sure that the city remains compliant. BC's restart plan has 4 different phases, and we've tried to be in alignment with those where possible. That proved a bit challenging, though, when the province would indicate and announce on short notice that they were opening up another sector of the province or of the economy. And we often needed to establish safe work procedures for staff. We needed to provide communications materials, signage, and so on. So sometimes there was a bit of a lag there, but it was necessary to make sure that we weren't getting ahead of ourselves, as Mr. Rudolph again just indicated. Our goal, at least before the vaccine is widely available, is to restore our operations to as close to normal as we can. This involves retrofitting some of the workstations and front counters with protective barriers, restricting meeting room capacities, and eventually allowing public access similar to what you're seeing in other places. There's a limit on occupancy, people are spaced apart, and there's ample sanitizing stations made available. This slide shows the various components that needed to be developed or drawn upon to create the overall recovery plan. And obviously, none of these were what anybody had planned to do with their 2020. As you know, you saw our business plans late last year. So all of these things had to be developed or found or sourced in terms of the ministerial orders in order to get where we are and to get us closer to reopening. All of these together represent a tremendous effort from a broad cross-section of staff, our union reps, and our joint occupational health and safety committees. So these people pulled together to share the load in developing this plan. It was weekly meetings, phone conversations, site walkthroughs, all this to make sure that the various decisions that needed to be made along the way took all factors and perspectives into account and yielded the best possible results for the city. In addition to the overall plan, staff have developed more operational department-level plans that outline how each department has specifically responded to COVID-19 and how they intend to transition back from where we started in March. They also identify the business plan impacts, both the good and bad, as well as some of the challenges or opportunities we've identified coming up. These we're providing to our CAOs. They pertain primarily to daily operational matters, but that work has occurred as well. As for where to from here, if the plan is approved by council and council passes the motion as outlined in the report, then staff will continue rolling out the department operational plans. We'll continue to monitor the information coming from the provincial health officer in the province, and we'll adapt our response accordingly. And that is the end of the presentation. If there's any questions from any member of council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Horn, and thank you very much to staff and all those who have been involved in preparing this. The presentation may have been short, but the background work on this is enormously complex. As I think council has discovered, shutting things down is one thing, opening them up is another, and it's problematic to say the least. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. A question, if I may, to Mr. Van Horn. In the disadvantages to this option number 1, which is recommendation of staff, you mentioned if the plan is approved by council, any deviations from the plan due to changing circumstances must be reapproved by a council, changes, that sort of thing. What we're doing here is a lot of operational type stuff. I'm wondering why we're asked to be approved this, and as another part of this is you also, unless the authority is delegated to staff, and how would we do that if that were the case?
I'll throw that over to Ms. Gurry.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Bonner, it goes with the overall motion, which is asking you to approve in general an umbrella policy. A resolution from council is basically a policy decision, and at the council level and applying to all as an umbrella, all the site plans, everything else, overall endorsing that and trusting staff to make the changes as applicable, and as the changing legislation, safe work procedures, etc., might change, we can adjust that at an operational level. But having the endorsement at a policy level at a council decision helps protect the municipality for liability purposes.
Okay.
I'll move the recommendation.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Gesselbrock, seconded by Councillor Bonner. Discussion? Well, I know council reads all its materials, so I'm going to suggest politely that this is a compliment to staff and the proposal. It's not a reflection of a lack of interest in the seriousness of the topic that we're able to get through this item fairly quickly. If I don't hear any questions or comments, Mr. Van Horn and staff and everyone involved, thank you very much. The recommended motion, all those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is COVID-19 recovery plan for council meetings. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. So just minorly different from the last plan you just endorsed, as it's specific to just council meetings. And it was decided it was a little bit special to do yours separately, as it's not a facility as with the normal programs and activities of the city are dealt with, and services. However, council meetings do require all of the business of the city to continue, and having these meetings continue during COVID-19 and the virus was essential to keep the business of the city moving forward. So the attached document in your agenda addresses the steps that staff and council have taken to ensure that that business was able to continue. Council in the city was affected by ministerial orders that allowed for business to continue, yet was flexible in order to ensure that the health and safety of council, city employees, and the members of the public was always maintained. So each new ministerial order aligned with BC's Restart Plan brings us closer to business as usual. Every step has required all of the components of the planning framework for municipal operations that Mr. Van Horn just outlined on the slide, which included WorkSafe BC, site plans, safe work procedures, ministerial orders, and all of those other components had to be taken into consideration for council meetings. So there's a lot of planning and logistics that goes into ensuring you can meet every week. So staff have worked very hard to make sure that these meetings have been able to move forward, keeping the health and safety of all top of mind. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank council for their patience in learning all of the new technology, and to my staff and IT staff as well for their tireless efforts, continually working on all of the logistics and glitches that have occurred along the way. And just to go forward, and I'll answer any questions related to both, the report that comes next that is part of this is in relation to the new ministerial order M192 that outlines the further steps local governments should take to enhance public participation in open council committee and task forces. So the report that furthers the council plan is seeking approval for the new rules in order to do that.
Ms. Gurry, if I may respond, thank you, and to your staff. It's not been easy for any council in this province to try and move forward, complying with provincial orders and trying to satisfy both the desire and the obligation to be as open and transparent as possible and keep the system functioning at the same time when it's important that things continue to move forward, particularly in light of the economic impact of the virus. Any questions for Ms. Gurry? Councillor Bonner.
Not a question, more as again, a thank you. It seems that in terms of technology, our main problem was trying to figure out how to unmute ourselves, and then staff figuring out how to mute us when we weren't supposed to be. Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. I do appreciate all the flexibility and the behind-the-scenes setup of things, and despite the odd age segregation of this setup, I'm digging the circle here, so thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Ms. Gurry. With regard to public hearings, I note in the recommendation that members of public who are not registered delegations will not be permitted to attend the meetings other than public hearings. Are we still going to be doing it the same by a distance, or?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Turley, physical distancing and all of the protocols in the legislation, gathering amounts, will all be followed. Public hearings are special in the nature that we have to allow the public to attend. However, there'll be extra staff on hand to ensure that they they're keeping their proper distance, and that we'll have holding rooms and areas to properly space them all prior to coming into the auditorium. So all of the appropriate safety measures will be put in place, but because of the logistics and the staffing and resources involved in that, it will be only for public hearings that we're recommending that be done, and not with council and special council meetings.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you, and just further to Councillor Turley. So, we're not permitting other than somebody who's a registered delegation. Is that because we often don't full the galley? The galley isn't full, unless it's a very controversial nature. Is it because of social distancing? Because we do have a few seats available, or?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Martman, it is because even though historically only a couple people have attended council meetings, we can't depend on that, so we have to prepare for the worst case scenario. So we would have to have that additional staff in place to monitor, to do crowd control, et cetera. So we, even if it wasn't necessary, they would still need to be here to ensure that those safety protocols were met. And the further change that we are recommending is that not only delegations for related council matters, but also delegations for unrelated council matters. So it opens up that public participation a little bit further, yet allows for the not having to worry about the crowd control.
So just for clarification and to make sure I understand, so as long as you've registered as a delegate, then you will be permitted. Thank you.
That is correct. And there is a site plan for this auditorium and for the lobby areas and the room adjoining to where we have maximum capacity, and the spacing has been set out and changed in the auditorium to accommodate the appropriate physical distancing.
It's not a perfect system, but on the other hand, at a time when the City of Vancouver, certainly again this morning in a conference call, talked about the significant deficits it's facing, it's imperative that we show fiscal responsibility, and we have to ask, is the money worth spending to have that kind of support when in fact there may not be needed and people aren't showing up? So it's a small inconvenience to ask people to register, but we're doing what we can, and I think it's the wiser and prudent course in the circumstances. Anyone else? If there's no further questions for Ms. Gurry.
The recommendation.
Councillor Thorpe moves the recommendation, seconded Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. I know Mr. Harding is very anxious to make his presentation today, reopening plan for arenas.
Thank you, Worship, and to Council. So building on the previous two reports, and then also in keeping with what we've been mentioning to the public and to Council for the last couple of months, we come back to you with phased reopenings of our recreation facilities, which of course are a little different than some other facilities, as particularly if you look at arenas or pools, we have a variety in arenas, dozens of different types of user groups, rental groups that need to be worked through, as well as is the demand side of things, and then of course the operational side of things. So today we're bringing forward to phased reopenings for arenas for consideration and review, and then on the 27th we hope to bring to you aquatics and our recreation centers for that. So with that, with any of these kind of reports, as Mr. Horn mentioned and Ms. Curry mentioned also, this is the information we have today. This is the best we can do. Things can change, as we know can change quickly, but this is where we're trying to move towards. As issues change, if the pandemic becomes worse, of course we have to move backwards. If it opens up and we have more demand, then we can adjust those things too. So as you see through the report, there's options for if we have increased demand, then we can open up another sheet of ice and maybe earlier. But this is where, based on what we know now, what we need to learn to open up our first arena, ideally on the 27th of this month. Then we'll learn more from that, learn more from the next, and so on. So that's the general part of it. Lynn Warwick will come forward and talk a little bit about what's gone into the development of this, but again, we don't want to spend too much of Council's time if you're comfortable with the report, but I will ask Lynn to come up, and she has a few words to say of how staff developed this in concert with looking at our user groups. So I'll ask Lynn to say a few words. And then also, Damon Johnson, arena manager, is here, as well as Laura Mercer from Finance will answer any of the dollar questions that we can't answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harding. Wish my grandchildren were as vigorous about cleaning up after themselves. Or good afternoon. Nice to see you.
Good afternoon. I think the report is pretty self-explanatory, but I just wanted to highlight a few things. First of all, we did participate on the corporate task force, a couple of staff from Parks, Recreation and Culture. So all of the reopening plan development that we did is in alignment with the corporate plan that you just heard about. And today we're speaking specifically about arenas. And our plans are maybe slightly more detailed in that not only do we have to consider and think about all of the staff returning to our facilities, but we obviously have a lot of public that are coming into the facilities as well. So what we had to do is go through a process where we did some in-depth risk assessments at each one of our facilities and then created our site safety plans, which are a requirement of WorkSafe BC, and then planned all the facility retrofits and personal protective equipment needs that we had, so very similar to the corporate plan. The difference for us is we needed to take a look at our service delivery in each one of our facilities and really decide what can still continue, what are we no longer able to do, and how can we modify some things so that they can still continue. And then we had to revise our regular operating schedules and slot in these different activities in a way that we could make them work and have sufficient cleaning time between each of the blocks of time. So once we did that, we then needed to conduct a bit of a financial analysis because obviously there will be less people coming into our facilities, and in some cases we need more staff time in order to follow all the COVID protocols that we have to follow. So what I can tell you about arenas is this work has all been completed. We think that we have a very good operating plan that accommodates all the protocol, and we do know that demand for the facilities is high. There are many people in the community that are very anxious to get back on the ice. We've been fielding many calls and emails, and people have just been trying to be very patient, waiting to find out what's going on. We do know that there are a number of user groups that have definitely kept the bookings that they've had in place for August and the fall. We have some people that have kept their bookings tentative and they're waiting to find out if we have ice. And so they're sort of in the gray area. And then we have people who just haven't made their bookings yet. They're waiting to see if we have ice. We feel quite confident that the people in the first category, where they've maintained their bookings, will probably fill the one sheet of ice. And we also feel quite confident that tentative bookings that we have, there's enough there to get a second sheet of ice going for the month of August. So the plan that we've proposed is installing one sheet of ice to be ready for July the 27th, which would be a bonus because it could accommodate Campbell River Minor Hockey and their summer camp. And while that sheet of ice is installed, we'll be connecting with all of the user groups that are tentative. And as soon as we feel confident that the second sheet of ice will be fully utilized, then we would install that sheet of ice and have it ready for August the 3rd. And then we would continue, of course, corresponding with all of our various user groups. And once people knew if the ice was open or not, we'll probably get even more demand. And then our intention would be to open a third sheet of ice for September the 1st. And at this point right now, we didn't schedule a date for the fourth sheet of ice. We wanted to see what the demand looked like before we committed to any date for that. And the advantage of this phased plan is as we gradually open one sheet at a time, should there be a second influx of COVID, we'll be able to easily scale back. That's one of the reasons why we did a phased plan. And also, I thought you'd be interested in knowing that we selected the sheets of ice in the manner that we did so that we could try and keep the user groups as separate as possible. So the plan involves the first sheet of ice going in at the Nanaimo Ice Center, the next sheet going in at Cliff McNabb, and then if everything's going really well with all of that, we would add the third sheet at the Nanaimo Ice Center. And this gives us the opportunity to really ensure that the facility flow that we have planned and all of the protocols that we have planned are working successfully before adding more people into our facility. It's critical still that we stay below the mass gathering number of 50. And I thought it might interest you to know as well, although BC has moved from phase 2 to phase 3 in the restart plan, in terms of recreation facilities, that really doesn't make much difference for us at all, just because we still have to maintain physical distancing and we still have to comply with that mass gathering order. So that is the plan. And because we have been closed for a period of time, I can tell you that when we did the financial analysis, it will cost more for us to operate between September and December than it typically would, but because we've saved money by not being open for a number of months, it essentially works out to be a bit of a wash. It's pretty much even. So that's the situation that we're in right now, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your work. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Work. On the disadvantages of reopening arenas, one point that tweaked my interest was arenas that have already opened have had problems with users following protocols, and for this reasons, 3 strikes and you're out. Any elaboration on kind of the issues that you've heard about? Or?
Certainly. Through Your Worship to Councillor Turley. We are still regularly participating in province-wide conversations with other municipalities. And what we do know is that some of the arenas that have opened, they've had a lot of difficulty with user groups following the required protocol. And that is, there's a couple of things that have resulted out of that. One is that municipalities are asking user groups to supply their own ambassadors to sort of help control the goings-on in the facilities, and that was a new thing that got implemented that's working really well, so we'll be doing the same. But they've also instituted in various ways a 3-strike-you're-out policy. So if a user group isn't complying with your protocols, they may get a verbal warning and then a written warning and then lose their ice time, because it's critical that we make sure that COVID doesn't spread. So everybody's taking it very seriously.
Anyone else?
I was going to move the motion.
All right. By all means.
Move the motion that council approves the reopening plan for arenas.
As worded. Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Ms. Curry.
Yeah, Your Worship, there is a more fulsome recommendation.
I was going to, that's why I added as worded. I'm sure that's what Councillor Markman meant.
I was reading it.
Just a little bit more, yeah.
Go ahead, read it out, Councillor Martin.
Okay.
We've got time.
Recommendation. Motion that council approve the arena's reopening plan that aligns with the city's COVID-19 recovery plan and complies with the components of the planning framework for municipal operations.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did have a question regarding attachment 1, and it looks like we're making $8,000. We're ahead of the game in the financials. That's how I read it?
It's actually an $8,000 overage if we include the Harewood covered sports there. So that's the difference that we're looking at over the course of the whole year.
Mm-hmm. Quite interesting. I wanted to thank you. These are 3 big reports. Great reading. Between our staff and Dr. Henry, I think you've done a fabulous job at keeping us all safe. So thanks very much for that.
You're welcome, and I can tell you a great deal of thought has gone into these plans, and it's really quite something to see it reduced to 5 pages, but
better distilling than the monks at the Benedictine monastery. Thank you very much. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, much appreciated. The next is Phase 2 reallocation of roadway space. Mr. Sims, moving along, so to speak. Never get tired of those horrible dad jokes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to quickly pass this over to Ms. Coe. Just as Council's aware, we were here, it seems like only weeks ago that we were talking about the first phase. So staff have gone away and developed some further refined options, which is in the report before you. And I'll pass it over to Ms. Coe. Without having once touched the, I guess I better still clean. I breathed on it. No, I didn't touch anything.
Ms. Coe, good afternoon. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this report was prepared as a team effort, so I'll make the presentation, and then when it comes time for any questions, I'll be calling on some of my teammates in the crowd. So since the June 22nd council meeting, staff have looked into further details on the logistics and costing of 3 preferred ideas for roadway reallocation. So these include additional cycling facilities on Departure Bay Road, implementing a slow street on Georgia Avenue, and developing a neighborhood grant program. Since we've looked into these things, we've also identified one potential additional option for council's consideration, and that is implementing a walking shoulder on the west side of Boxwood Road. So I'll just briefly summarize these ideas and our findings and some of the costs. So starting with Departure Bay Road. So at approximately 9.5 meters in width, Departure Bay Road is not currently wide enough to accommodate appropriately wide cycling lanes on each side of the road. Staff proposed to keep the northbound downhill lane as it is. So since this is a downhill, confident cyclists are able to keep pace with traffic while riding in that section. There's an opportunity to create a 1.9 meter buffered bike lane on the west side, which is the uphill side of the road. A buffered bike lane entails using 2 parallel painted lines with cross-hatching, and this emphasizes the space as a bike lane a little bit better than just a single painted fog line would. An example of this can be found on Boundary Avenue, if you're familiar with that. The capital cost of this work would be around $40,000, and annual maintenance would cost around $2,000. So the second one, a Georgia Avenue slow street. So this initiative would build off of the recently completed bridge and multi-use path through Harewood Centennial Park by continuing the Georgia Greenway as a slow street. Staff propose a number of elements for the slow street, and while we are recommending that all of the elements be implemented, council may wish to pick and choose from these elements. So the first one is reduce the speed limit on Georgia Avenue. The capital cost of this would be around $15,000 and $2,000 in annual maintenance. The second, introduce 2 temporary traffic circles using recycled materials for a capital cost, or an upfront cost, I should say, of around $5,000 and $5,000 in annual maintenance. Crossing enhancements at 5th Street, Harewood Road, and 4th Street for a capital cost of $65,000, and that would have $5,000 approximately in annual maintenance. So the next option is the neighborhood grant program. I'm not going to speak about this one too much. This program will take some time to develop, so staff would need to return to council at a future meeting with a program concept and recommended budget amount for future financial plans. And then on to the additional option that was not discussed previously, but this is the Boxwood Road walking shoulder. So in 2018, staff had carried out a preliminary analysis of the possibility of creating an active transportation connection on Boxwood Road between Tulsa and Dufferin, and this would entail repurposing existing parking spaces. At the time, the work did not proceed because there were community concerns about losing parking in the area. Part of staff's analysis of this was a parking study, and when this was carried out, it showed that there is sufficient parking in the area to meet needs. So we are bringing this forward, thinking council may wish to reconsider this or may consider revisiting this project as part of the roadway reallocation initiative. And the cost of this would be around $40,000 and annual maintenance costs of $2,000. So those are the 4 options. The total cost for completing all projects would be around $170,000. These costs can be covered using money within the existing financial plan, but it's important to note that the funds will need to be reallocated from existing projects that are currently underway. So staff recommend that all of the initiatives in this report be implemented, but again, council may wish to select certain initiatives and not others. So you'll see in the staff report, we've included a kind of a menu of these options and the associated costs. But yes, staff's recommendation is that council directs staff to proceed with all street space reallocation options funded by reallocating budgets within the current approved financial plan, and the development of a neighborhood grant program concept with a report back to council for endorsement in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ms. Coe. Much appreciate that this was thrust upon you fairly quickly, and you've come back with a nice suite of potential, recommendations for council for potential approval or disapproval. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, thank you, Ms. Coe. I just have one question, and that is you mentioned options funded by reallocating budgets within the current approved financial plan, and we do have an organizational work plan in place. Is it possible to identify which projects would be affected if these funds were reallocated?
Through your worship, I'm already opening my wipe so I can invite another one of my team members to help with this question.
Thanks very much. We're well ahead of schedule today, so. Councillor Thorpe wants to know which Peter is paying Paul.
Yes. Through your worship, so the projects that we've identified are the Stewart Avenue Complete Street preliminary designs. So we've actually advanced that to a point now where we've got some funds remaining in the budget that we're not going to need. We've also got one of our transit studies that we're not going to be able to advance this year as a result of challenges with public engagement. And then the other two that we're looking, or we've identified, are the funds that we would be otherwise using for 2 new transit shelters.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm in support of all 4, particularly as we're able to reallocate budget for them. But I do have a question. A walking shoulder, how does that differ from a sidewalk? Like, what does that practically look like for pedestrians?
So it looks, through your worship, it basically looks like a buffered bike lane. So we're actually having it on the road grade where the parking stalls are right now, but we're just going to apply the double white line delineation with potentially including some bollards at conflict areas if we see those.
Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. So I'm not sure who wants to answer this question, but in my memory, and I could be totally wrong, the west side of Departure Bay at one time, and I don't recall seeing it any different, had an open ditch along it. Is that still there, or is that going to be covered in? Or
Through your worship, the ditch will remain. Infilling the ditch would be quite costly. And as Ms. Coe said, if we reallocate some of the space on the easterly side, we do have a bit of room to incorporate a 1.9 meter buffered bike lane through the majority of the corridor.
so if I could just ask further, so that then at some point in time, if it's needed, it is there at a cost, of course, to widen the road?
Yep, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. I see that Boxwood is an additional option, and I love the pedestrian safety. But we've been getting a lot of emails recently around Extension Road. Mm-hmm. Is there anything in the works coming for traffic calming or working for more safety on Extension?
Yes, through your worship. So we've kind of known about Extension Road for a while, and it's a very awkward road in that it's a transition from a very rural area through a very residential area onto a major highway. And drivers tend not to sort of slow down and then reintegrate onto the highway. So we have been aware of it. I've had a couple of conversations with some residents out there in the last week and a half, and their indication to me is that it's really changed over the last year. I suspect most notably in the last 3 to 4 months. And so what we've done is we've reached out to the Community Association, and we're actually starting a traffic calming review process with them to sort of hone in on where their biggest concern areas are and really sort of focus our efforts on those areas to try and address some of these concerns and these traffic management issues.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Rose. You referenced the transit study, which I assume was the BRT study that was going to be done in conjunction with the RDN network review?
We have 2,
okay.
Actually. So
I'm just curious if that. I just want to make sure that in the future that BRT study would be completed. Yeah.
Yeah, through Your Worship. So we actually had 2 studies that were planned for this year. One was the frequent and one was the rapid. And so what we're going to do is sort of reconfigure the package and come at it from the more technical approach right now, and then have the public integration when that's possible.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to thank Ms. Kosh for the report. I'm quite liking it. It's a great start. I had a couple of questions. One is, what is maintenance? Are we just talking repainting lines? Is that what it's for?
Through Your Worship, it depends on which option we're talking about. If we're talking about the departure bay, that's just the refresh of the road markings every sort of 7 to 10 years when they need to be done. They are going to be put down in thermoplastics, so they do have a fairly good life expectancy, but they still do wear. If we're discussing the intersection changes for the Greenway, that's a lot different. That's the actual maintenance and operation for the traffic signal, and again, more road markings, but more biased toward the traffic signal.
So is maintenance putting money away for when it has to be replaced 10 years from now?
So we included the O&M costs in these options because it's something that needs to be considered when we're moving forward with these. And the one that we kind of really wanted to flag your attention to was the in-term treatments with the traffic circles. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking old backhoe tires and putting appropriate signage and some weighting in them and using those as temporary traffic circles as a pilot project to see how the community receives them. The difficulty with them is the benefit is they're very cheap to deploy. The challenge is they're also prone and susceptible to damage and to movement, and so there does need to be a fairly diligent effort of staff going out, monitoring them, checking on them, addressing repairs as quickly as possible so that it doesn't become a bigger problem. So.
And if I may, one more. In the consultation with the folks on Boxwood, who was consulted in that? Because most of Boxwood is mostly just industrial places.
Yeah, so we did a letter drop 2 or 3 years ago when we were considering some changes, and so all of the businesses and property owners along that frontage were consulted, and they were concerned about the changes to the parking. They're also concerned about visibility coming out of their driveways, and so it is an option for you guys to consider if you want to.
Well, I would think visibility would be greatly increased if there was no cars there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Is it fair to say, Mr. Rose, that interrupt Councillor Bonner, that given parking issues we've recently heard about there will be a protest from people employed in that area? Is that fair to say?
That is a risk, yeah. So.
From someone who uses that road quite a lot, it's in my hood, there's not a lot of cars on that side of the street, maybe 20, but there's also an awful lot of empty parking lots in industrial places where these people are probably working, so they should just park in their parking lots.
As we indicated, when we did our study, there is capacity to balance things out, but it was a concern of the community.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to probably Mr. Rose. The Georgia Slow Street, you mentioned The crossings of 4th, 5th, and Harewood, but I don't recall there currently being a monitored crossing for 6th Street. Is that something that, because traffic's lower there, or is that?
6th Street was, had some enhancements through the Georgia Greenway, so there's.
So it's already there?
extensions.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I'm supportive of all these measures and the additional one, and I appreciate the attention put by staff to the quick turnaround time on these, and liked reading through the plan for the slow street of Georgia Ave and recycled materials in the center of the way as the roundabouts, and I really appreciate just looking at how to deploy things quickly as pilots and then assessing how they work, and this concept of slow streets, I really hope, close attention to this and see it expanded. So this is great few initiatives to flex our active transportation muscles, and I'm really looking forward to more. So thanks for the good work, and yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. There was a Part B in one of the motions on page 132, but it's not on the actual motion, and it mentions the development of a neighborhood grant program concept with a report back to council for endorsement in the future. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, through your worship. So we think, like, we've got the idea, but in order for us to fully flesh out the plans and the needs, and put together a bit of a working toolkit, we just couldn't turn it around in this sort of time frame. So what we've put forward is just the comment that we're going to continue to work on that. Okay. We're going to come up with a project scope and concept, and then come back with an update to council on that.
Okay, thank you.
If I may. Sorry, we also neglected to mention one other thing that was a bit of a late entry option that we just got confirmation on Friday, and that is to repurpose some of the street space on 4th Street, west of Wakeside. So we've had some conversations with the university and worked with them to be able to reallocate some of the space on the north side of 4th Street, so along the school district frontage, to incorporate to eliminate the parking and incorporate a cycling facility there. With the understanding that it will be reviewed when VIU comes back into a more typical delivery method.
Setting up the perfect conflict, the students with cars and the students with bikes. I like it. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I think my question was answered in that I'm asking if there's any more new ideas coming down the pipes that we can look forward to. But nobody's listening.
Worship, I've asked Mr. Sims to give a brief commercial on the next report coming to you in 2 weeks, which might address some of your questions.
So perhaps we can get to Councillor Hemmond's question, though, on this topic, as opposed to getting on to the bluer skies.
Thank
Councillor
you, Your
Hemmons.
Worship, and through you. So the route going up to VIU, is that going to go right up the bus route to the university, or will it stop at the Parkway Trail?
So through your worship, the portion we're talking about is from Wakesaya to the trailhead,
Okay.
where the crossing is.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions before we go to Mr. Sims? Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Your Worship. So to give a new and improved outlook to, this is the commercial part of it that Mr. Rudolph referred to. A few weeks ago, I mentioned to council that, you know, we've heard loud and clear the commentary around desiring to understand transportation a little bit more. And so that's part of what you're seeing already. In 2 weeks as well, we'll be coming with what we hope is a semi-annual update on transportation projects. So you'll see the report in advance. It's fairly heavy. It's trying to give an overview of the work of the Division of Transportation, and just provide that to council and talk a little bit about some of the challenges and as well as some of the upcoming projects and things that we're working on, just so it's a little bit more on your radar and a little bit in front of you, as opposed to wondering what's happening. As an example, extension, wondering what's happening there. Meanwhile, there is work, but just so you can have that vision a little bit. So we're trying to catch up.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. A quick question. It just tweaked my mind here that we see every once in a while projects come under budget, and sometimes we see them come over budget. So I was wondering, instead of at the end of the year, we have X amount of projects that were under budget and we have this much of a surplus, would it be in keeping to have, say, by the way, this project came $50,000 under, we'd like to put it onto this project that we hadn't, that wasn't in the main plan? Like, repainting or adding bike lane here, that sort of thing. Is that an option?
Through your worship, I think it's a very good option. I think there's a number of things that go on. One of them is that until we know a project has reached what we call substantial completion, that we have a solid dollar value, we don't like to give the money away or release the money from the budget line item. So that's one consideration that often delays knowing how much money we have left over. But nevertheless, we're continually projecting our project budgets, so we have a good sense. The other thing is that also coming in a couple of weeks, or pardon me, next week, is a semi-annual update on just general capital projects of the Public Works Group, or Public Works and Engineering Group, that we'll show some of the overages and some of the underages, if you know what I mean. Sometimes we're often in front of you with budgets that are short, but there's a number of projects as well that we have sufficient budget. So it's just trying to strike that balance and demonstrate what we have. All that to say there's all of these things that go into how much money have we got that may be surfacing in the middle of the year that we'll try and keep an eye on. I think that's a good suggestion. Thanks.
Any further questions? I just want to thank you, Mr. Sims, Ms. Coe, Mr. Rosen, everybody else who's been involved. Well done. Yes.
I'll move the motion that council directs staff to proceed with all options funded by reallocating budgets within the current approved financial plan.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Initially, I had absolutely no issue with Georgia Street or Boxwood, and I was struggling with Departure Bay because of the volume of traffic that street has. However, hearing that the ditch at some point in time at considerable cost on the west side could be covered in to widen the road, then reluctantly I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not as kind as Councillor Turley on many levels. When this first came forward, I recall saying that I supported moving it forward to the next step, and I did so reluctantly, and I would have a close look at any proposals that were made. So with all respect to staff and to the many councillors around this table who will support this motion, I have to tell you that I will not. And I've said this before, and I'm really glad, Councillor, I'm just going to go on for a bit, Your Worship. Councillor Armstrong's recent motion about recording council votes, and I want it on the record, and I've said this many times before, that I support active transportation. But I always have the caveat that I do not support it at the expense of impeding vehicle traffic or reducing parking. And this original motion came forward, and I have the wording in front of me actually, reallocation of roadway space for physical distancing and temporarily using streets for pandemic recovery and response. It has nothing to do with pandemic recovery, and in fact staff replied that Nanaimo does not, I'm quoting, does not face comparable congestion issues, and so on. There's negligible risk of transmitting the virus when briefly passing, and so on. So these changes are being proposed under the excuse of pandemic recovery. And I recognize that councillors support them irregardless of that, but I'm sorry I don't. Reallocating budgets, $175,000 is money that I feel could be better spent elsewhere, and in fact could be better spent where it was originally supposed to be spent without changing our organizational work plans or altering those plans. I look at the proposals, not just reallocating budgets, but reallocating roadways. So Departure Bay Road, as Councillor Turley just said, it's a busy vehicle roadway, and I know there's frustrations for cyclists, but I don't think the answer to safety for everybody is redistributing road space. When we choke down roads, drivers just get more frustrated and take more chances. Slow Street on Georgia Avenue, reallocate street space, same thing. People are just going to get frustrated. The Neighborhood Grant Program, I would support that, except at this point, I note that the report states there'll need to be an ongoing funding commitment for future financial plans. I think that's considerable. Plus, I would not support it until we have in place what is meant by a neighborhood association, something that this council started to grapple with, but we have not come back to since. So I would need that in place before I looked at giving grants to neighborhoods. What constitutes a neighborhood association, and how do we vet that? And the last one on Boxwood Road, we're eliminating parking, which we heard was some time ago a concern of residents or businesses in that area. So yes, we would create a walking shoulder, but at the expense of parking. So for all of those reasons, Your Worship, I am sorry, but I just cannot accept or support these recommendations, and that, for the record, will be reflected in my vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Gessebrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the reallocation of road space, I think one of the biggest barriers to moving forward with active transportation and building infrastructure that's going to get people to walk and cycle more is this perception that reallocating road space is a hassle and a disruption to drivers. And I think that what we really need to do is start working on the process of actually creating proper infrastructure for active transportation, and we'll see that it's going to make roads safer and more utilized by all users. And until we actually invest, I know Councillor Thorpe says that he's supportive of active transportation. However, support at the end of the day comes down to budget allocation and action. And so I think as a cyclist and a driver, Departure Bay Road, for an example, that could use some upgrade safety. And if we want to risk having accidents in the future, because I can tell you, if you work at a bike store and in the business of selling e-bikes, there's a lot more of them on the roads, and there's just going to be more of them. And if we don't get ahead of this and build the infrastructure, it's going to cause unsafety for our residents. And I think that's a primary priority for all of us, is to build a safe city. I think, worrying about losing parking and this, we're fortunate we have an incredible amount of space on our roads, and with Boxwood, I think that, if the community is coming forward and saying that there's opportunity to create better pedestrian infrastructure, we need to take advantage of that. So thank you.
Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm in full support of the motions, and to Councillor Thorpe's point, I totally take it about this being about a pandemic response. I took that to be more broad. I think we're going to see the pandemic play out in our community over the next number of years in things like job losses and people changing the way they live in order to respond to the new economic reality. So I get your point about it not necessarily being connected, but I think at the end of the day, we want to build a community that we see for ourselves in 20 years' time rather than replicating what's going on right now, because I think what we're doing right now is just going to ensure that we kind of have the same thing 20 years down the road. So I'm in favor of this because I think it broadens that idea that pandemic recovery is going to take longer than September or December, and that the economic reality of our residents really will be impacted. Just an anecdote, I was at the Harewood Skateboard Park with my kids on Sunday. There was an outdoor yoga class, the water park was on, there were people in the lacrosse box, there were probably 40 people using the skate bowl, and there were 8 cars in the parking lot. And Georgia Greenway goes right through Harewood Centennial Park. So absolutely, we need to keep the infrastructure for cars because that's primarily how people get around. But if we're interested in building that community that works for other folks, people with lower incomes, people with multiple children, et cetera, I think we need to start thinking about infrastructure that works for everybody. And I think this is a good start. So thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I'm in favor of the motion as well. I agree, Councillor Thorpe, that it was COVID that brought us into a conversation about safer streets and street spaces and what can we do differently in our city. It caused us to do this deeper dive. But just because we may not have to react to it just to COVID, I, like Councillor Hemmons, want to see what is the city going to look like 2 or 3 generations from now. I believe that e-bikes and different types of mobility will be a wave of the future, and we want to make this as livable a city as we can. And that is not always about cars and parking. And the redistribution of space on the roadways, we saw a few years ago, and Vancouver went through a lot of complaints about bike lanes, et cetera, but you ride down Vancouver streets, downtown Vancouver now, what used to be 6 lanes, 4 lanes now with a bicycle each for pedestrians, a lane each for pedestrians and bicycles, and it works. And so I want to see us do what we can do in our city, very much in favor of this and even more in the future.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think a lot of good points have been raised, and I will be voting in support of this. Thank you.
I can't resist being a little cheeky this afternoon. We always debate the most about the smallest amounts of money, and I'm not minimizing this amount. $170,000 is $170,000. And Councillor Thorpe's points are well taken around this issue. There's no question parking downtown, accessibility for parking downtown in particular, has been an issue for years. The very same people who tell us we should have more bike lanes don't come downtown. They happily drive to Woodgrove where the parking has been free or plentiful or whatever. So I understand there's always a natural hypocrisy in the community which is evidenced by the practice as opposed to what they preach. Notwithstanding all of that, I think this money is well spent for a couple of reasons. Firstly, as Councillor Gusselbrock has pointed out, to use that overused cliche about if you build it, they will come, that's what we have to do. You have to provide an infrastructure that is welcoming for people who are going to ride their bikes, e-bikes or bicycles or ancient 3-speeds if that's their choice, whatever the case may be. So you have to do it. If it's not used, and I trust there'll be some monitoring, then I expect the public to feed that back to us and tell us. Because there's no question this is a response to community interest. I won't call it outcry, but community interest in this. And let them put their money where their mouth is, so to speak. If I don't see a lot of e-bikes or bicycles going up Departure Bay Road, then I'm going to know it may be politically appealing to a number of folks, and maybe we can tick this box in the next election and say, look what we've done around this, but the truth is it's not being used. For the amount of money involved and the importance of this, as well as a signal to a younger generation that takes a different view of the world, many of whom don't own cars. Many of whom don't get driver's licenses until they're much older. I've said before in this council chamber, and I won't phrase it quite as crudely as I did before, the reality is, in my generation, turning 16, the most important thing in the world was getting that damn driver's license. That was the rite of passage. That was all you were concerned about. Now you see young people, for a variety of reasons, well into their 20s before they bother to get a driver's license. I mean, I just think that's shocking. from my perspective. But having said that, I accept that the world is not made up of 67-year-old white guys, you know? I mean, it's a much better world. And I don't mean that in a critical sense of my generation. I just mean, I think we have to accept and understand that our community is a broad place filled with all kinds of people and various interests. And I think $170,000 on this is a good investment in creating a different future for the community. And I just want to again express my thanks to Ms. Coe and all the staff who've worked on this issue. So obviously I will be voting in favor of it. And thank God for people like Councillor Thorpe, though, who are prepared at this council table to go against the tide. As you've heard me quote my dear old granny before. She used to say, Leonard, if the herd's going one way, just make sure it goes the other. And I have no problem with people who take a strong and principled position on in votes like this, where they come from a place of principle and practicality and are prepared not to go with the majority. And I sincerely hope that the public, if they're listening or paying attention at all today, the city's spending your money to provide this. It's up to you to use it and prove that the 8 councillors who, or 7, pardon me, 6 to 7 of us who will probably vote for this have in fact been justified in coming to this conclusion. So if I've inspired anybody else to say anything, I won't use the term inspired. If I've encouraged anyone else to say anything, say it now. Councillor Turley, you can have the last word.
I just want to say that whenever I voted against something as being 8-1, you've never been as kind as you were to Mr.
I feel sorry for you.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Thorpe opposed. Thank you very much.
On that note.
That was a good debate. Other business? Ms. Gurry? None.
None.
Agenda planning. Ms. Gurry, please.
Thank you, Worship. So, as the same as the last special council meeting, council had is an agenda for the next special council meeting, which would normally have been a governance and priorities committee meeting. So I wanted to bring council's attention to what we have scheduled for the next one and have council discuss possibly future meetings. However, I thought we would postpone that given it's the August break coming and the next scheduled special council meeting isn't until September, almost mid-September actually. So it's quite a full schedule on the 27th. It's going to be an all-day meeting. Mr. Rudolph spoke earlier about social procurement, and it's going to be at least a couple hours of the day. And then there's capital projects, part 2. You had a part 1 discussion a month or so ago. Sports venues, Mr. Harding's bringing forward, and proposed amendments to MOESS. So if council has any questions or concerns, but I wanted to at least let you know of what was coming up for your next special council meeting.
Councillor Turley and then Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Ms. Gurry. The MOESS discussion, I understand there's been some meetings with staff and developers, and are they going to be invited to that meeting, or is that?
Your Worship, this is tentative, this date. We expect that the group that's been meeting with staff, and I've chaired 2 meetings, I think those are the main ones. There's been a number of bits of correspondence and so forth back. It's my understanding that there's been consensus on the changes that have been made, though I'd like to see that in writing. And I actually suggested to them at the meeting that they should come to the meeting and explain that they are satisfied with it. So I think it's preliminary, but it would be an open meeting. And this is just reporting back to you that the group that staff have been meeting with, who don't pretend to represent everybody, but suggested that they basically represent everybody that's doing most 90% of the business. We can certainly report back to you what the changes are, and we're hoping that they will either attend or submit something in writing that confirms that they're generally satisfied. That's the goal.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. On the question of social procurement, at the end of the conversation of that day, are we going to be looking at an actual policy or the meat of one?
Your Worship, Ms. Lagan, who's away right now at some cabin camping, will be leading that facilitated discussion with the help of 2 consultants. So I think the goal of that session is to get us to a place where you agree on a path to move forward. So they gave an overview at our senior leadership meeting last week. And so the goal is to get us further down the path of moving forward. So it's maybe informing us for budgets and that type of thing. So I don't have a specific report in front of me to tell you what that will say, but that I know it's much more focused than the discussions that you've had before, and I think you will find it informative. And I'm not sure what motions are being asked for, but clearly it might be into that debate about motions versus if it's a workshop or whatever. But we're treating it more like a workshop to get your head more around a smaller number of the pieces involved in it, and cultivating a path forward. One of the interesting things that they did showcase with us at the meeting last week was a comparison of where we stand relative to some of the other municipalities in the province, and that was to me, that was a highlight chart that showed the progress on social procurement vis-a-vis some of the other municipalities. So we asked them to specifically add that into their presentation, so we know where we stand relative to some of the other similarly sized municipalities. So I think it'll be a good session. It takes a lot of time to get your head around it, and we asked them to be light on the presentation and heavier on the conversation. So I can't answer specifically your question what the output will be. It will really depend on council's general feeling that they're on the path that they are comfortable with.
Thanks.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. Just to add to what Mr. Rudolph was saying, I believe the first session you had quite a few months ago now was before Ms. Legan arrived, and you were supposed to have a follow-up discussion trying to narrow down those components of social procurement in order to proceed with the policy. So I think that this facilitated discussion with Ms. Legan and the facilitators will drive you to that road and bring you one step closer. So I think it might not be totally on the way to a policy, but it's definitely closer to where you need to be.
Thank you very much, everyone. Motion for adjournment?
Oh, sorry, I got a quick question here. Just a question on the neighborhood association discussion that's planned. Is staff actively in contact with the neighborhood associations right now, just getting feedback and discussion?
Thank you, Worship. I was looking around semi-desperately for Mr. Lindsay, but he's not here. I believe with COVID happening and the Neighborhood Association Part 2 that was going to come before the Governance and Priorities Committee, we had talked at your Governance and Priorities Committee meeting, special council meeting, about perhaps sending that to Bang the Table, our engagement software program for neighborhoods to get involved and give their feedback that way, and do that as the next step of the process and then report back. However, that is being led by Mr. Lindsay's group and Ms. Bopal-Singh, et cetera. So I'm not sure where the progress has been at with the myriad of other items that they have had to deal with. However, it remains on your agenda on the Council Governance and Priorities Committee planning list. It remains on there as an item to follow up on. So it's still on your list that needs to come back here in the progress that's been made. And maybe Mr. Lindsay could answer if neighborhood associations are being actively
Mr. Lindsay.
still talked with, et cetera.
Always good to hear from you.
Thank you, Your Worship. The update I can provide is just right in that week when I think COVID hit us there in March, the neighborhood network, the overall network, was coordinating, as I understood, to get together to have a session, and we were going to be invited to have a kind of discussion about moving forward on that topic. And of course, that meeting got canceled. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe they've had a neighborhood network meeting since that time, but I'd have to follow up with them.
Councillor Gesselbrock, anything further?
Yeah, just I think just with the upcoming OCP, and I do agree with Councillor Thorpe's comments about grant programs and getting the neighborhood association process solidified. If there is bandwidth to be able to reach out and potentially get some type of consultation with them before that meeting, I think that it would help expedite the process and make for a more fruitful discussion.
Mr. Lindsay.
Your Worship, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but I want to make sure that council's aware that even though we're going down this path of reviewing the framework for overall neighborhood associations, they remain active, we remain actively engaged with them, and whether there's a time for council to review their governance model before the OCP, they're still going to be engaged through the OCP process. So I just want to make sure everybody was clear on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We are done. I would, everyone, if 4 o'clock if they wish, and